Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was a father to Athena and Aphrodite's child. Being a single father with two little girls is hard enough, but when there are monsters trying to kill them every day, it's even worse. Well, he loves them more than he loves himself, so he would just have to hope for the best and pray to the mothers of his children. Welcome aboard! A Father's Love, Chapter 6. Sally Jackson was stunned as soon as she walked into Sweet on America. Right in the middle of the store, between the chocolates and the wine gums, her boss was making out with perhaps the most beautiful woman she had ever seen in her life. She was so gorgeous that Sally had a hard time believing that she was real, so much so that she had a hard time concentrating on her. It was as if her features would constantly change. The tone of her skin was a little tanned at first, but soon Sally noticed that it was actually a creamy white shade of perfect skin. It was the same with her hair. It looked dark brown at first, but after Sally blinked it turned into the most stunning of red tresses that flowed to her lower back. It was hard to believe that someone so stunning would actually exist. Sally! Exclaimed Naruto as he pulled away from the kiss, blushing at the fact that his employee walked in on him and Aphrodite. Gee, good morning. Sally looked sheepish and turned away. I'm sorry I interrupted you too. Some melodic giggling pulled Sally's attention back to the couple. It's all right, dear. The goddess wrapped her arms around Naruto's and smiled. We're sorry you had to see us like that. We'll get out of your way. She pulled Naruto to the office in the back as she gave Sally a friendly wave. We'll be in the office if you need us. But I should help set up. Aphrodite pushed her lover into his office and lightly closed the door behind them. Naruto groaned as he sat down on his chair, shuddering at the thought of the awkwardness later in the shop. He was quite thankful that his other employees were coming in later and didn't see him such a compromising position. He had tried hard to establish a formal but friendly attitude for his employees, but that might be for naught. I should have remembered that you have employees coming, the goddess muttered as she looked at her image through a mirror she magically summoned. We're lucky we saw her so quickly. People usually see me as the perfect beauty of their interpretation, but now that I'm staying with you, I'm going to permanently take the form you see as me. The mirror vanished as she sent him a wink. Since I'm going to meet the people around you, it is best that I keep a constant appearance. Naruto nodded, but was still blushing. That's a good idea, but I wish that I could have remembered that I had people coming in earlier. Aphrodite giggled and sat down on Naruto's lap. Don't be embarrassed, that wasn't as bad as the time the waiter caught us at our booth. Don't even remind me of that, replied a red-faced Naruto as he wrapped his hands around the goddess. It took me a long time to forget about it. To this day I haven't returned to that restaurant. She giggled again and kissed him softly. Oh, come on, everyone in the restaurant was jealous of you. Naruto chuckled and kissed her back. I guess that's true. And it wasn't as if you didn't enjoy what I was doing to you. Aphrodite nibbled on his lower lips as she stared into his eyes. I remember that it was your loud moaning that alerted the waiter that night. She giggled as she felt something poke her between her legs. I don't blame you, though. Naruto stared hungrily at Aphrodite and his hands started to roam her body. You're making it really hard for me to not take you right here on my desk. Oh, that's kinky. The goddess bit her lip as she leaned down closer to him. Do you have some sort of fetish of fooling around in the office? Did you do it here with some other girl? Naruto closed his eyes and blissfully breathed in her scent as he kissed her neck. I haven't been with anybody since you left. What? He chuckled at her surprise and just continued to kiss and nibble at her sweet skin. It's not that surprising. Having two little girls doesn't exactly give me a lot of time for dating. He pulled back a little and stared into her widened violet eyes. And I really loved you and still love you, so it was hard for me to find someone else. She bit her lips as a surge of guilt and sadness filled her, though I would be lying if there weren't some pretty ladies, but they're just not you. The goddess gently cupped his face and lovingly kissed him. I'm so sorry. Naruto smiled and shook his head. You have nothing to be sorry for, the important thing is that you're here now. I will never hurt you again, she whispered against his lips. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, and I'm staying with you. She snuggled and rested against him. We'll be together from now on and live as a family, the four of us. Sounds good. He pulled her down and kissed her tenderly on the lips, slipping his tongue into her warm and wet cavern. She tasted like honey, and he was once again becoming addicted to her taste. He had nearly forgotten about how wonderful it felt to kiss Aphrodite, but with only one kiss all his desires and addictions rushed back. He wanted nothing more than to make sweet love with the woman he loved, and give her as much pleasure as he could give. I love this man so much, thought Aphrodite as she wrapped her arms around his head and added more pressure into the kiss. It was incredible, in all of her immortal life she had never felt so much affection for any person. It dwarfed whatever affection she had for Ares or Adonis, it was completely in a class of his own. For the goddess of love who had been in love countless times before, it was truly something special. This is the real thing, he's my true love. Naruto slowly reached into her blazer and started to slip his hand under her silk shirt. Her skin felt just as smooth and creamy as it did all those years ago, and it made his desire amplify tenfolds. He wanted to have her under him again, moaning his name in ecstasy. He wanted to feel her warmth, her wetness, and her love. He wanted to take her again and again until he made her fall in love with him even more. But all his plans were obliterated when someone knocked on his office door. "Who is it?" cried Aphrodite as she turned to the door with an intense glare, resisting the urge to blast the person to Hades. It was Sally, I'm sorry for interrupting again, but everyone is here and we need Mr. Namikaze to come start the registers and give us the plan of the day." Naruto was disappointed, but smiled at the adorable angered look on the goddess' face. "I know, Sally, I'll be out in a second." Waiting until the footsteps were gone, he turned to the woman on his lap. "It's okay, beautiful, we have the whole night tonight." Aphrodite smiled saucily and kissed him tenderly, "You better be ready for it." "I've been ready for years." Olympus, Athena's temple. After an hour-long argument between Artemis and Apollo, Athena finally managed to drag the goddess of the hunt back to her temple. She had to wonder if her arguments with Poseidon were as annoying and stressful as the twins. The goddess of wisdom couldn't believe the massive headache she got just from listening to the siblings argue about who their mother loved more. It was nearly as bad as when Zeus and Poseidon would argue over Mother Rhea. That damn arrogant moron. Artemis was still angry as she stomped into Athena's temple. "I can't believe he thinks his son's better than my hunters." Athena sighed and rubbed her temples as her sister rambled on, "Zoe alone can defeat all his sons. Can we please get back to our original objective?" Artemis groaned, "Honestly, who knows where that lovesick goddess is?" "Well, it's not that hard to guess," she muttered as she sat down in one of her many chairs. "For Aphrodite to extend such a favor to our brother means that she really doesn't want anyone to find her, and there is only one reason that could possibly make Axe so careful." "You mean?" Athena nodded with a sigh, "Yes, I think she went to find Naruto." "She is going to get into so much trouble," Artemis mumbled. "At least you only stayed there for a few minutes, but from what we've gathered, she's been there for at least 8 hours. The goddess of the moon sighed as she looked down at her sitting sister, "And I don't think she's going to come back soon." "That stupid woman," grumbled Athena angrily. "If Ares or Hephaestus find out she's so close to Naruto, they are going to kill him." "You're right, they will definitely do something like that." "I'm going to go find her." Athena stood and started to glow. "Are you coming with me?" Artemis sighed and nodded, "Yes, at this point I'm a little committed." She stepped closer to her sister and crossed her arms, "Though I need to go back to the camp for a little while and ask Zoe to drive the chariot for me tonight. Do you mind coming with me first?" "Of course not, let's go." "Here, try this one," chirped Aphrodite as she happily fed Naruto a small strawberry truffle. Ignoring the slightly awkward glances from Sally and his other employees, Naruto smiled and gladly accepted the treat. For the past few hours Aphrodite had been looking over the selections Naruto had in his store and provided him with a list of items he should omit. There were many products in the store that she said was an insult to sweets, and Naruto knew perfectly that no one knew more about candy than the goddess of love. Though there were many she adored and she was busy with feeding them to Naruto, sometimes from mouth to mouth. Delicious. The goddess giggled and turned her attention back to the laptop, typing in all the candy she wanted to order from various places on Earth, mostly from France. Every one of Naruto's employees were surprised at the amount of knowledge their boss girlfriend had on sweets. Ever since she opened the laptop, she had been typing names after names of candies along with their various ingredients and their manufacturing process. Naruto smiled at her enthusiasm and pecked her on the cheek. Thanks for helping out.
No problem at all.
Looking at the clock, Naruto smiled and clapped his hands.
Okay, it's time to close up.
Sally and the others smiled and nodded. Thanks for the great day, guys. The boss stretched his arms and grinned. Remember to come meet us tomorrow, Sally. Sally smiled back and nodded. Of course, Percy is very excited about it.
Oh!
Exclaimed Aphrodite excitedly as she turned to Sally, making her a little nervous.
You're Percy's mother?
Yes.
Tell me, do you think your son has a crush on Annabeth?
Dite! Cried Naruto, horrified at the prospect of his baby girl liking a boy. Sally giggled and shrugged. I actually asked him that a few days ago and he blushed and yelled at me, so I definitely think he does.
Boys, huh?
Aphrodite giggled and clapped her hands together, getting angry whenever they try to deny something.
Nobody has crushes on anybody.
Naruto waved his hands around and shook his head. My baby girl does not like any boys.
The goddess merely pointed at Naruto with a smirk. See?
Ignoring Sally's laugh, Naruto grabbed his girlfriend's hand and led her out the store. With a quick goodbye and a reminder to lock the door to his employees, he left the store and headed towards his car, all the while trying to rid the disturbing thought of one of his princesses dating some boy. They will always be his little babies and will never like any boys.
No, just no.
Aphrodite giggled at Naruto's reaction and hugged his arm close. He was just too cute. She loved teasing him about Annabeth liking that Percy boy. The way his eyes would widen and his body would shiver was just too funny. It was very sweet of him, but he would have to face the facts sooner or later, and she would be there to see it and laugh about it. In fact, she had already planned out of daughters' love lives. She would make sure that they would both be very happy. All she needed was to meet Percy, so she would plan his life together with Annabeth's.
For my birthday present, maybe you could make it so that Annabeth and Lacey will never like any boys?
The goddess grinned and shook her head. Never, those girls are beautiful and deserve the best love lives. Naruto paled at the thought of his girls spending nights with boy and shook his head viciously, making her giggle.
Don't worry, Daddy, both girls will have a very happy marriage and a great family.
She smiled up at her lover. I promise.
I guess that's better than nothing. Come on, you big baby, let's continue our day.
Aphrodite let go of his hand and got into the passenger seat of the car before she grabbed his hand again.
Where are we heading next?
We'll go pick up the girls and go to the supermarket to get something for dinner.
Sounds fun.
In the past week, Hestia had been enjoying her job as a teacher. She had always adored the children of her siblings and would treat them as her own, but even including them, Lacey was quickly becoming her favorite. The little girl was adorable, even more so compared to the other children of Aphrodite she had met before. Hestia could see so much of the goddess of love in the little girl, most prominently in Lacey's bubbly personality and charming smile. The way her eyes would light up at the sight of a fresh batch of cookies just melted Hestia's heart.
Thank you, Miss Hess, exclaimed Lacey as she quickly grabbed 3 cookies from the tray. I love you.
Hestia giggled before she began to attend the other children. I love you too, sweetie. Hestia had made a tradition out of handing out fresh-baked cookies at the end of the school day, and the children had never been more excited about anything. The parents were all happy at how happy their children would be when they picked them up and was perfectly fine with the cookies. They were mostly oatmeal and were healthy. From the corner of her eyes, Hestia watched as little Lacey stand beside her sister, both seemingly waiting for their dad. The goddess of the hearth almost squealed in delight when she saw Lacey split half of her last cookie and gave it to Annabeth. It was endearing to see such love between two demigods with different godly parents. The Olympian siblings had never been very close, except for Hestia, who was loved by everyone, so seeing such a scene was heartwarming. Then a familiar car drove into the parking lot.
Daddy!
Cried Lacey as she jumped into her dad's arms.
I'm hungry, can we get some ramen?
No, I want sweet potato mash and ribs. Annabeth held onto her dad's hand and looked up at him, or baked potatoes and roast beef, that's good too. Naruto playfully rolled his eyes and kissed both his baby's forehead. We'll decide when we get to the supermarket. Hestia smiled when they looked over at her direction and she waved over at them, smiling at their wonderful family. In the domain she shared with her little sister Hera, Hestia would often feel delighted at the sight of happy families, and Naruto's certainly was one of her favorites. But then she caught sight of something inside their car.
Is that?
Whatever she saw disappeared as soon as she laid eyes on it, but she distinctively felt a very familiar aura of power.
Don't tell me she actually came down here? That was far too close.
Aphrodite sighed in relief as she appeared back inside Naruto's home, holding her hand to her chest as her breathing leveled out. She had forgotten that she and Athena had asked Hestia to look after their daughters. She had no idea the goddess of the hearth would actually pose as Lacey's teacher, but she had to admit that it was very smart. It was very dangerous. Hestia had almost seen her, and if she didn't teleport that instant, she might have been sent back to Olympus. I better not teleport back to the car yet, Hestia might be looking for me. Seeing how she had time before Naruto and the girls would come home, she decided to explore her new home, or the most important part of her new home, the master bedroom. Now that she only had one lover, she planned to have an amazing sex life with him. Even several years ago, Naruto was an incredible lover. His stamina, strength and overall huskiness made her loin burn and knee quiver. She had missed making love him with over the years and couldn't wait to spend the night with him. Especially after she took Hera's sacred bath. Just thinking about it made her giddy, and she skipped all the way to the bedroom. It was exhilarating. Hera was absolutely right, a wife preparing a wonderful night for her husband felt very sexy. Just the thought of Naruto as her husband made her heart flutter. She had decided to not use the more powerful of her love magic on Naruto, but she still had her bag of tricks. Naruto's world will flip upside down in the morning. With a snap of Aphrodite's fingers, the room was filled with a subtle scent of her personal brand of aphrodisiac, one that will make Naruto lust for her even more than before. Then, with a flick of her wrist, the simple white curtains morphed into a luscious sheet of deep purple silk, the white walls turned an elegant shade of purple, and the hardwood floor turned into rich and fluffy black carpet. Then the most important part, the bed. The simple queen-sized bed changed into a magnificent king-sized bed, with a 7-feet-tall black leather headboard with intricate silk designs, a wide black wooden frame with a lighted edge, a perfect mattress made out of the softest celestial cotton and wool, and the most beautiful purple and black bedspread with knitted patterns worthy of Athena. With one last wink to the lights, it dimmed to a soft fluorescent glow. Perfect. With a pretty smile, she turned to the final object in her way.
Now, what to do with all these books?
But her smile soon faded when she saw all the books on Greek mythology. She shouldn't be surprised that Naruto decided to read up on their tales after having children with 2 Greek goddesses, but she wasn't too excited about it. Her actions in the past hadn't exactly made her an angel in the eyes of mortals. She was exactly ashamed of her past lovers, but she wanted Naruto to know that she was only with him now and those other men were out of the picture. She had to assure him that her relationship with him was nothing like her marriage to Hephaestus. She truly loved him and would truly marry him.
Daddy, let's hurry and eat.
Shaking her head of her troubled thoughts, Aphrodite snapped her fingers and made the 3 bookshelves vanish before she teleported down to the main floor. The scene that greeted her made her feel better instantly. Naruto was walking into the kitchen holding a bag of groceries, then Annabeth followed after him with another bat in her arms, and Lacey just skipped after them with a lollipop in her mouth.
Calm down, princess, dinner will be ready soon.
Naruto's eyes met with the goddess of loves and relief quickly rushed through him, making her smile. She walked up to him and gently kissed his cheek, making him smile silently and continue to put the groceries away. I'm sorry I suddenly vanished like that, she began. I thought someone was messing with my domain somewhere in Spain, so I had to quickly check.
Naruto smiled and nodded.
So, are you girls okay with having just spaghetti and meatballs? Aphrodite smiled at Naruto who was looking at her as he spoke and nodded. nodded. That sounds delicious. The goddess used her illusionary powers to hide her plate and food from the girls so she could eat at the same table as them, her first family dinner ever. I love everything you cook, honey. Oh, she had waited a long time to call someone that. Naruto winked at her. Thank you, honey, he whispered softly. Artemis Hunter Camp. Yes, milady, I will prepare for the flight immediately. Artemis smiled and nodded at her lieutenant and closest friend. While Athena may have her brain children, her hunters were like her own flesh and blood. Her older hunters, Zoe and Phoebe, may be more like sisters, but all the others were like her daughters. In a way, Artemis would sometimes think she had also found a way to keep her chastity and feel like a mother. Athena smiled and nodded at the huntress as well. Thank you, Zoe. It is of no inconvenience, Lady Athena, I am glad to help. As Zoe went to prepare the moon chariot, Artemis turned to Athena with a smile. Are you hungry, sister? Maybe we should join my hunters for dinner before we head for New York. The goddess of wisdom smiled and nodded. I would like that. It's been a long while since we've had dinner in your camp. Artemis smiled and led Athena to the camp by the hand. My hunters may not be as skilled as Aunt Hestia at cooking, but I'm sure you'll like it. Good night, princess, whispered the blonde as he kissed his baby girl's head. I love you. After finally convincing Annabeth to stop reading her new book and go to bed, Naruto began to tuck Lacey in. The little girl was already tired from her day at school and was semi-asleep when he carried her to her room. As mature as she was with love and her sister's crush on Percy, traits she inherited from her mother, she was still a little girl and definitely acted like one to her daddy. Now, onto his most anticipated part of the day, spending the night with Aphrodite. All throughout dinner, Naruto's mind had been wondering about the night. He could still vividly remember the last time he made love to the goddess of love, and it would still exhilarate him every time he thought about it. He just wished his prowess in bed didn't diminish over the years and he could still satisfy her. She wasn't like his girlfriend like before, she was going to stay with him, more like a wife. That took the pressure to a whole new level. Don't be nervous, whispered a beautiful voice to his ear as a pair of slender and soft arms wrapped around his waist from behind as he walked into his room. Just let your feelings guide you and make love to me, just like you had so many times before. Naruto turned to face her and pulled her closer. I plan to. Aphrodite closed the door behind and locked it securely. She snapped her fingers to make her current clothes vanish. Her jeans were replaced with a tiny thong and her silk shirt changed into a lacy red ribbon tied together quite precariously. She stepped up to a stunned Naruto and wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her large breasts against his chest as she did so. You're just perfect. Aphrodite smiled and leaned up to kiss him lightly on his lips. Thank you, Naruto, you're really good to me. She massaged the back of his neck and bit her lips. I love you. I really mean it. I know that my reputation has suffered throughout the centuries and I might not appear as someone who could be faithful to just one man. Hey, what are you saying? Naruto whispered gently. I fully believe Dash. The goddess cut him off with a kiss. Please, let me finish. Naruto reluctantly nodded. Most of the stories written about me in mortal myths and legends are true. I am temperamental, flirtatious and seductive, but it is a little different now. I will only be temperamental with you, most likely when we disagree over what clothes to buy for our little girls. I will only be flirtatious with you, probably when we're in public, because I love how you react to it. Aphrodite smiled as Naruto pulled her closer. And I assure you, I will seduce you every single night from now on, and only you, my love. She had tears welling in her eyes as she felt her emotions bubble to the surface. I have decided to leave everything behind and have a fresh start. This is completely new to me. I intend to find out everything about being family and a loving mother with you. Aphrodite kissed him again and smiled against his lips, and with Annabeth and Lacey and with our future children. Naruto ran his fingers through her luscious hair and kissed her tenderly on the forehead. I love you, Aphrodite, you really don't have to say anything. I fully trust you. I know, but I needed to say it for myself. She guided Naruto's hand to the red ribbon and helped him pull it down, allowing the small article of clothing to drop to the ground to reveal her perfect breasts. This is literally a fresh start for me. She smiled brightly and looked up into Naruto's eyes. I went to Hera and used her sacred bath. I used it to completely purify my body and to regain my virginity. Naruto's eyes widened as he felt an unprecedented surge of emotions rush through him. I've never done this before, but I believe that you are truly the only one for me and I wanted to do this for our relationship. I don't know what to say. He whispered as he wiped the tears from her cheeks. You don't have to say anything, she pushed him down onto the bed and straddled his waist. Just make love to me, take my maidenhood and make me yours. She kissed him as softly as she could and spoke against his lip, forever. Naruto knew that no words could possibly convey his emotions to his lover at that moment, and the only way to do so was to use his actions. He kissed her with as much love as he possibly could and spoke inside his mind. I don't deserve this, but I'll give her something she deserves or die trying. 5th Avenue, New York City, Mother Ria's home. Mother, why are we suddenly moving? Hestia came home to see all hers and her mother's possession packed into Ria's small magic suitcase and their apartment was completely empty. Her mother had a smile on her face and held a house deed in her hands, looking amused beyond words. I bought us a house closer to your workplace, she said with a smile. It's right next to your new favorite nieces and Athena and Aphrodite's love. Hestia was shocked before she shook her head with a sigh. Why? Why not? Ria chirped as she placed her hands on her hips. Do you have any idea how boring it is to just sit at home all day watching the world go by? This little mortal man's relationship with little Athena and Aphrodite is the only interesting thing going on right now and I'm going to enjoy it. She stood up and held her daughter's hand with glee. Most of my soap operas are becoming repetitive and no matter how much I complain to Apollo, they are not getting any better. Let's hope this little situation entertains me better than television. Mother, this is not a soap opera. Oh really? If you could sense the other goddesses the way I do, you would not think that. Ria giggled as she pulled her favorite child along. Aphrodite has been at that mortal's home since yesterday and Athena is about to come visit them in the morning. This has entertainment written all over it. Hestia groaned and shook her head. This is not going to be pretty. No, not at all. Artemis Hunter Camp. As she enjoyed a nice long dinner with her sister and her hunters, she couldn't help but feel a shiver go down her spine, as if something terrible had happened. She shrugged it off with a copious amount of ambrosias and nectar she shared with Artemis. She was starting to have a headache, and decided to take Artemis' offer of using one of her tents for the night. She didn't want to visit Naruto so late during the night, the girls should be all asleep and she didn't want to possibly rouse them by pulling an annoyed Aphrodite back to Olympus. The last thing Athena needed was for her daughter to find out about their world in such an undignified way. She needed to be patient and careful. What's the worst that could happen if I wait until morning? A Father's Love, Chapter 7. There had never been a better morning, in the millennia that she had lived, never had there been a morning so perfect, so comfortable, and so right. Right. She woke as if she was a cloud floating weightlessly in the blue sky. Hovering above the troubles of the world, completely separated from the rest of existence, she floated in bliss. It was as if all her cares and troubles had vanished and only her happiness remained. After centuries, millennia, ages, eons, she had finally found peace. And she would have never thought that her true peace would come in the form of one mortal man. Naruto. She spoke inwardly as a blissful smile graced her beautiful face. Oh, my wonderful Naruto. She knew her lover had his arms wrapped around her waist and she was resting her head against the crook of his neck. She knew that their legs were tangled together and their chests were attached firmly, and it all felt perfect and natural. It was as if she had been completed, like two pieces of a puzzle, they were perfectly aligned and attached. It was where she belonged, it was her home, it was the once place that made her feel at peace and happy with him. Dite. He softly whispered as his lips brushed against her forehead. She smiled at the voice and the fact that he was still asleep. It appeared that exactly like her, he was still dreaming of their night together after so long. The mere thought of it made her smile, it was the best night of her life. It was perfect, never had she felt so loved or cherished. He noticed every twitch of her body, every expression of her face. It was as if he could dwell into her mind and pleasure her in ways she never thought possible. She was happy, her husband was perfect in the bedroom. She could feel his body against hers at that very moment and she loved it. It was a wonder on its own that a simple candy store owner would have such a perfect body. Adonis couldn't have compared. Her love for him may have improved her vision of how he looked like, but that didn't matter. Her lover, husband, destined one, was perfect. Good morning. Aphrodite slowly parted her eyes as her perpetual smile grew to match the one on Naruto's face. His arms were tightened around her as he pulled her closer, rubbing her body against his as he did so. His warmth enveloped her and she snuggled more into him, determined to be as close to him as possible. How'd you sleep? He asked, his voice a whisper. Like a mortal in Elysium. She kissed him softly on the neck and breathed in his scent. You make an amazing pillow. He chuckled and ran his hand gently across her flawless skin, a role I live for. He sighed in bliss and hugged her tighter against him. You are just so soft and warm, just hugging you like this makes me want to sleep in. Can we? She whispered softly with her eyes closed, letting the warmth and bliss take over. Let's just sleep the day away. It's Halloween tomorrow, he replied with a small smile. The girls will be up early and would want to make cookies and carve pumpkins. Aphrodite smiled at the thought and snuggled closer into him again. That would be fun too. How about we go take a shower then wake the girls? She giggled as she pulled away a little to look at him. Just take a shower, or are you thinking of something else? I'll have you know that I'm very good at multitasking. She laughed as she kissed him tenderly on the lips, nibbling on them as she pulled away. Alright, good, but I am a little sore from last night so you will have to carry me to the shower. He smiled back and winked. Your wish is my command. As soon as the couple stepped into the master bathroom, Aphrodite snapped her fingers, and the room morphed before their eyes. Naruto watched in fascination as the white tiles he had gotten used to over the years completely changed into elegant black marble. The white walls changed to the same shade of purple as the bedroom, and the small bathtub expanded into a massive black hot tub. A new steam shower stood in place of his old one and, along with the new black porcelain sink, was traced with golden rims. All in all, it was very nice. Naruto chuckled at the amazing change and marveled at the sight. He had always wanted a woman's touch in his home. With a swipe of her hand, the hot tub was filled with water with the jets on full blast. There we go, perfect. Naruto chuckled as he held his lover in his arms and carried her over to the water. I'm going to get so lazy if you keep doing this stuff. Aphrodite just smiled and kissed him playfully on the chest as they both sat down into the water, both sighing in relaxation at the hot water rushing against their skin. Naruto pulled Aphrodite onto his lap and held her close, letting her rest her head on his shoulder. Now, do you want to do this with or without soap? Hestia had to admit, their new home wasn't too bad. It wasn't as luxurious as their old home on Fifth Avenue, but she had never really been a goddess to care about such things. Unlike their gigantic apartment, their new house had a nice fireplace with a wide chimney, one where she could form a very nice fire and make some delicious s'mores. Artemis and Persephone would love it. She could already see some nice family dinners in the near future, but seeing that Naruto lived right next door, inviting Ares or Hephaestus might not be a good idea. Tia, come here for a minute. The goddess of the hearth looked away from the nice fireplace and walked back into the kitchen to meet with her mother, who was dressed very much like a normal mortal woman. With a pair of tight blue jeans, form-fitting tank top under a black blazer, the mother of the gods looked no less elegant and graceful than usual. Rhea smiled as she fiddled with her new kitchen appliances. She bought a completely new set of equipment personally designed by her grandson, Hephaestus. What do you want for breakfast, dear? Anything is fine. I would pick something good, replied Rhea with a bright smile. I conjured up some chairs on the balcony in the master bedroom. We could have our breakfasts there. The Titanist snapped her fingers as twin plates filled with eggs, sausages, bacon and toast appeared in front of her. If my timing is correct, the show should be starting soon. Hestia gave her mother a stern look. Mother, this is a matter of family, not some soap opera on televisions. You're right, this is way better than the garbage on TV. You are just gorgeous. With a smile, Naruto pulled the freshly dressed goddess into his arms and kissed her tenderly on the lips, nibbling at her lower lip as he pulled away. She was perfect. She was beautiful without trying, elegant without effort. With just a simple pair of tight gray jeans and a red t-shirt, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. Her long red hair was tied into a simple ponytail, and it made Naruto's heart flutter. He had always loved ponytails. Aphrodite combed her fingers through Naruto's soft and spiky hair with a smile. You're quite handsome yourself. Lacing her fingers with Naruto's, the goddess led them out of the bathroom. No wonder so many women around you have feelings for you. Yeah, muttered Naruto with a sigh, those single moms at the girls' school are quite forward sometimes. The goddess giggled and shook her head. I'm not talking about them, silly, I'm talking about Percy's mother, Sally. Naruto almost tripped on the new carpet at her words. What? You're still as dense as ever when it comes to these things, said Aphrodite with a smirk. She could still remember when she first met Naruto and all the hints he missed from her. Yes, I can feel that Sally has somewhat of a crush on you. It was quite obvious, really. When she saw us kissing yesterday, I could clearly feel jealousy, even though she hid it very well. Naruto closed his eyes and scratched the back of his head. Well, what should I do? Just let it be. She knows that you're with me now and should give up soon. Aphrodite needed no reassurance. She knew perfectly that she was the most beautiful in the world and had no competition from any mortal woman. Besides, she might be your future in-law, so you want to keep a friendly relationship with her. Don't even joke about that. Aphrodite laughed at his horrified expression and pulled him downstairs. Come on, I'm a little hungry and I want you to make me some breakfast. She smiled back at him and winked. We still have to think of some way to introduce me to the girls. Right. Mumbled Naruto as he scratched his head. He may be good at thinking up strategies for many things, but introducing a woman to his daughters would be much harder. We better start thinking about something. Annabeth is far too smart for some lame excuse. He smiled at his lover. We'll tell them who you really are sooner or later, but we should think of a nice cover story for now. How about, the goddess started as she sat down at the dinner table, we say that I'm your high school sweetheart and we started up again after all these years? That sounds pretty good. We can have a lot of fun with this. Aphrodite giggled and winked at Naruto. We can be a really cute couple, who met in high school and were really in love, but my parents don't approve of you and we end up splitting up. Naruto chuckled at the excited look on the goddess' face. We went to different universities in different cities, but we still have feelings for each other, and when he met again a few weeks ago we ended up getting together again. That's the plot of hundreds of movies I've seen on television. Aphrodite smiled proudly. I was the first one to give Apollo's sons such good ideas to make into movies. Naruto smiled and placed a cup of coffee in front of his lover. Okay, so we're high school sweethearts and sometime during after we split, we get together and make a child together. Yep, and they both resemble you more and inherited your blonde hair. Naruto leaned against the table with his mind wandering the possibilities. Ding dong. The doorbell knocked Naruto out of his thoughts and made him turn to the door. It was still quite early in the morning and nobody should be visiting them. Aphrodite followed after her lover, wondering if it was one of those people she had heard about from Hermes, the people who like to knock on doors and advertise about some god named Jehovah. She sure hadn't met a god with such a name. Hello? As Naruto's eyes widened, Aphrodite's smile vanished. Hey Athena? The last thing Naruto expected in the morning was for Athena and some other lady to ring his doorbell. Aphrodite bit her lips and gave the other two goddesses a smile. Hey, what's up Athena, Artemis? Naruto's eyes widened again and resisted the urge to jump away. After reading so much on Greek mythology, he knew perfect who Artemis was. Seeing how he was a man and was a father of two demigod children with separate goddesses, he was expecting the goddess of the hunt to strike him down. Thankfully, Athena and Aphrodite were present, so he was probably safe. The goddess of wisdom seemed to avoid Naruto's eyes and focused on Aphrodite. We need to leave, spoke Athena stoically as she grabbed Aphrodite's arm and started to pull her away. Hey Athena, wait! Cried Naruto as he watched Aphrodite being pulled out of his home. What in Hades are you doing? cried the goddess of love as she resisted, flaring her power as she did so.
Let go of me, you stupid owl. Don't argue with us, Aphrodite.
Artemis scowled at her eternal opposite and sighed, you've already spent enough time here, and you have to return to Olympus before you get into serious trouble.
Athena nodded along, we have interrupted with his life enough.
An unsurmountable anger filled Aphrodite, how dare they mock her love for Naruto?
I'm not going back.
Aphrodite glared at both goddesses and tuned her charm speak, let go of me right now.
Without another word, Athena released Aphrodite.
What I do here is none of your business, so leave me alone. Naruto, who was still shocked at the scene, finally broke out of his stupor and ran up to the goddesses. He quickly grabbed Aphrodite's hand and pulled her back a little.
Dite, what trouble are they talking about? I know about the rules, but what will happen to you?
Nothing. She glared at Athena and Artemis as her power grew, what I do in my domain is my business, and no god can tell me what to do. I've finally found true love after so many years, and I'm not going to give it up just because of some rules. Aphrodite pointed at the other two goddesses and stepped forward, I am warning you now. If any of you try to get in my way, I will curse you for all eternity. Athena and Artemis were shocked at how angry Aphrodite was, they had never seen her like that before. I will curse all your descendants, aside from Annabeth, all your children will suffer the worst fates with love and all of them will kill themselves afterwards. Her power flared again as the ground started to shake, and I will curse all your hunters, Artemis, all of them will be forced to fall in love with the worst men in existence and all of them will abandon your order.
Dite, calm down.
Naruto hugged her from behind and pulled her back a little, please, this will not help the situation. Artemis growled at the love goddess and summoned her bow and quiver, don't you dare threaten my hunters.
Oh, I dare.
Aphrodite's power was growing rapidly and was slowly exceeding that of Artemis, I will even curse you, even you will be forced to fall in love. Artemis would never admit it, but she felt a hint of fear as she stood in front of the raging goddess of love. She had almost forgotten that Aphrodite was one of the eldest Olympians and was a daughter of Uranus, the primordial of the sky, and was extremely powerful. If you dare take me away from my love, I will curse you to fall in love with Apollo.
Athena stepped forward, this is going too far, Aphrodite.
Naruto was straining to stand on his feet because of the power emitted by his lover, Dite, stop this.
No.
Aphrodite looked back at Naruto with pained eyes, I will not lose you again. Naruto's and Athena's eyes widened at her words.
I love you, Naruto, I really do.
I meant everything that I said last night, and I will not allow anyone to interfere with our lives.
You are the one putting Naruto in danger. Athena stepped forward, adding to the pressure, making the streets shake. Ares will come and kill Naruto himself if you keep doing this.
I will never let that happen. Aphrodite stomped her foot and stepped forward, I will personally castrate him if he dares come close to Naruto.
Athena was once again shocked at her viciousness and conviction.
Love and hate are only a flip side, Athena, and I swear of the river Styx that I will personally send Ares or any other person who tries to harm my love to Tartarus. Thunder boomed in the sky, marking the acceptance of the sworn oath. Athena's eyes started to glow as she suddenly summoned her golden spear. I will drag you back to Olympus myself if you don't stop this madness.
A golden helmet formed on her head and she glared at Aphrodite.
Your very presence here threatens the safety of Naruto and my daughter, and I will never allow that. Artemis' eyes widened at the sight of the potential battle between love and war. Naruto jumped into the middle and stood between his two loves. Please stop this. Both goddesses' eyes softened at his plea, but still stood strong.
Move out of the way, Naruto.
Athena stared at the man she loved and frowned, no matter how this may seem at the moment, this is for the best.
Get over yourself, Athena. Aphrodite's red hair flared and stood upright in the air.
The only reason you're mad at me is because I've done what you couldn't. Athena's form started to flicker, making Artemis wonder if she should jump in and stop the fight. I know you love Naruto just like I do, but you don't have the courage to act upon it. No matter how confident and wise you are, the notion of love frightens you to no end, and no matter how much you want to do exactly what I am doing right now, you can't. Naruto couldn't help but look over at Athena, his first love, wondering what she was thinking despite her stoic expression. You spent your entire immortal life trying to convince yourself that you would never fall for any man, and now that you've fallen for one you're terrified at what would happen. You'd rather hide and run away from love, trying desperately to convince yourself with as many excuses as you could think of that this is only a phase and you would get over it. Aphrodite stepped forward as Athena's facade started to break. It's pathetic. I will never run away from something like this, and I would rather fade than let it just pass me by. She walked up to Naruto and tugged him over to her side. I know for a fact that this is something special and unique, and I'm going to cherish it. Dite. Naruto had no idea how to react. As much as he loved Athena, he had to admit that what he felt for Aphrodite was stronger at the moment. Feel free to run back to Olympus and hide in your temple, but I'm going to stay here. Athena had her eyes closed as her spear vanished, and her shoulders were slightly shaking. Naruto couldn't help but step closer to her. He gave Aphrodite a pleading look, making her sigh and let go of his arm. As the auras of power started to diminish, Naruto stood in front of Athena and placed his arms on her shoulder, trying to stop her from shaking. Athena. Slowly, Athena started to bite her lips and tears started to leak from her closed eyes, making her turn away from Naruto. He felt his heartache at the sight and slowly brushed his thumbs across her cheek, drying her tears. Her eyes parted as she looked up at him, tears still flowing freely from her eyes. The softest sob finally broke free and she buried her face into his chest, making him wrap his arms around her. Aphrodite's eyebrow twitched at the sight. Naruto, she's fine, just let her go. Just let her have a moment. Artemis cried as she glared at Aphrodite, you are so insensitive sometimes. Should you really be talking, you dumb deer hunter? Naruto had never once thought that Athena would actually shed tears. She appeared far too powerful and dignified for such things, but he could feel her tears soak his shirt. Her usual confidence and godlike aura were replaced by an overwhelming amount of sentimentality. Naruto couldn't bear seeing his first love in such a state. He wanted to see that peculiar affectionate smile she would give him whenever he would make a joke, or even that angry glare that would petrify him, anything but seeing her cry. He delicately combed his fingers through her long black hair and held her closely. It's okay, Athena. Athena held onto Naruto's shirt with her eyes shut tightly. I am just so confused. Aphrodite rose an eyebrow and continued to listen in as Artemis felt a little uncomfortable and out of place. I've lived for a long time, but I've never once felt so strongly about someone. Her shoulders were shaking as she tried to focus her thoughts. I am a virgin goddess, Naruto, and I'm not supposed to feel like this. Aphrodite crossed her arms and nodded to herself. She knew perfectly that she was correct in her assumption. Athena had never been in love her entire life and was absolutely petrified at the fact that she was falling for a man. Never had the goddess of wisdom had to face an obstacle greater than her intellectual powers, but such a powerful love wasn't something she would reason through. Aphrodite's domain was rather irrational, she'd know. You don't have to force yourself into anything, Naruto whispered with his brows furrowed. You don't owe me anything, and no matter what you do with this, it won't change how I feel about you. Athena lightly shook her head from within the warm embrace. The problem is that I want this. I want to do what Aphrodite has done and I want to know what it feels like to have a family. She bit her lips as her pride prevented her from voicing her remaining words. I want to know what it's like to have a husband, a lover. You do have a family, the blonde said as he brushed some tears from her cheeks. You are the mother of Annabeth, we are her father and mother, we are a family. Nothing will ever change that. But I've never even spoken to her. Guilt and shame filled Athena as she held on to Naruto. Then why don't you just stay and meet her, like me? Naruto and Artemis turned to look at Aphrodite in surprise. I'm not saying that you should be staying here all the time, but what's stopping you from just coming here once a week to play with Annabeth? The ancient law prevents us from helping our children and stops us from interfering with their possible glory, but nothing stops us from just being a part of their lives. As long as we don't guide or lead them down a particular path and just let them make their own choices, there is nothing stopping us from being here. Aphrodite scoffed and shook her heads. Most of us can figure this out, but many just don't care enough to actually take the time to visit the children. She sighed. Lacey is the only child of mine that I care about at the moment, as horrible as it is for me to say that, it's true. Artemis sighed and rubbed her temples. Her logic is sound. Based on what I know of Apollo, he often visits his children at the camp inside his cabin, and father often overlooks it. The huntress' eyes linger on Naruto as he held Athena and narrowed. Though if father were to find out that you're in love with a man, I have no doubt that he'd blast him to ashes. Not if I can do something about it. Aphrodite glared at the huntress. Even the king of Olympus will not stop me from taking love away. The goddess of love flared her power a little. Don't you dare tell your father about this, or I will follow through with my threat. I will watch the world fall apart without my domain. The huntress glared back at the red-haired goddess. I won't, and you can rest assured of that. Athena gently pulled away, showing Naruto her slightly red eyes. So, would you mind if I stop by on occasion to visit you and Annabeth? Are you kidding? Asked Naruto with a bright smile. I would love it. Just as long as you don't stay in the bedroom. Aphrodite gave the wisdom goddess a stern stare. I said you can visit Naruto and Annabeth, but you better not think that I'm willing to share him. Naruto is mine and you better stay a virgin. Naruto blushed as Athena seethed. Mind your filthy words, you stupid pile of foam. Bite me, Minerva. Oh, I will kill you if you call me that again. Oh, did I strike a nerve there? Aphrodite sniggered with a hand delicately covering her lips. You should really calm down about the whole Roman deal, you're going to get wrinkles on your face. Athena let go of Naruto entirely and stomped the ground. How about I carve some wrinkles on your face with my spear? Oh please, you can't even put on lipstick without going out of the edge. You'll never be able to carve the right wrinkles. Naruto couldn't help but smile at the sight. Aphrodite was absolutely right when she said that Annabeth and Lacey acted exactly like her and Athena. Annabeth would stomp the ground and glare just like Athena did, and Lacey always had some clever quips up her sleeve to make her sister crazy. It was almost endearing to see the two goddesses fight over words. Would the two of you shut up? Demanded Artemis as her eyes glowed a silvery light. You shut up, you wild boar. I'm going to shoot your eyes out. Naruto chuckled as the third goddess jumped into the fight, but he was smart enough to not get in the middle of it. Daddy? Everything halted when the voice of a young girl pierced through all the arguments. Naruto felt a shock run down his spine as he slowly turned around to look at his front door. His mind was working 100 miles an hour when he saw Lacey peeking through the door still wearing her little princess pajamas. She tilted her head to the side and scratched her loose blonde hair with confusion. Who are all these pretty ladies? Dad, cried Annabeth from behind Lacey. Did you feel the house shake a few minutes ago? Naruto gulped when he saw Lacey turn to look inside the house. Annie, come here. Some dreaded footsteps were heard and soon Annabeth stood over her sister, also looking at her dad and the extremely beautiful ladies. Do you know these people? Annabeth crossed her arms and focused her gray eyes at the group of women. Dad, who are they? At the moment, his little girl's eyes looked more frightening than Athena's. Even Athena had to say that her little daughter really inherited her ability to glare at people. They are my sisters, said a sudden voice from behind the whole group. Lacey's eyes widened in joy and ran out of the door. Miss Hess. The little girl ran past everyone and jumped into the arms of her absolute favorite teacher of all time. Why are you here? Hestia giggled at the girl and resisted the urge to laugh at the other goddesses. My mother, sisters, and I just moved next door. She smiled at Naruto as she held Lacey close. I'm sorry if my sisters were bothering you so early in the morning. They wanted to greet the neighbors and introduce themselves. It's no problem. I was awake already. Hestia's warm red eyes appeared oddly frightening to Athena, Artemis and Aphrodite, and they shivered when the eldest Olympian gave them all a sweet smile. Mother is finished with breakfast, so you should all come home now, okay? Oh okay, Athena muttered with a nod as she walked up to her aunt. Artemis nodded along and stepped forward as well. Yes, I love mom's cooking. Aphrodite pouted. Can I just dash? Now, firmly said Hestia. Okay.
Oh, Tia, it's no rush.
Hestia almost palmed her forehead when she heard her mother's voice. Breakfast can wait, we should be polite and properly introduce ourselves to our neighbors. One of the most beautiful women Naruto had ever seen appeared next to his daughter's teacher. She was even comparable to Aphrodite.
She was definitely not old enough to be their mother.
Athena's eyes widened as Artemis and Aphrodite made a weird choking noise, and Mother Rhea.
Oh, enough with calling me that, Artie, just be normal and call me Mom.
Rhea turned and smiled at Naruto, who blushed a little.
So, you're the father of the nice little girl my daughter is teaching?
Yes, ma'am. Well, we'll also be neighbors from now on, we just moved in this morning.
Rhea smiled at her daughters and giggled. Maybe we could have a nice neighborly dinner sometime?
Naruto smiled nervously and nodded, that would be great. Now Tia, Thea, Artie and Dite, we should stop bothering this nice young man and his girls so early in the morning. The mother of the Olympians smiled and gestured them to walk up to her, to which they all followed as strict orders.
Let us go home for now, you still have to pick your rooms and start unpacking.
Hestia sighed and shook her head, sure, let's go.
Wait!
Cried Lacey as Hestia placed her back on the ground.
Miss Hess, do you want to come costume shopping with us later?
It's Halloween tomorrow and we can go pick out cute costumes and make cookies and carve pumpkins.
Well,
Hestia was trying to think of the kindest way to decline the little girl's offer.
Sure, that sounds really fun. Rhea smiled as she knelt down to Lacey and pinched her little cheeks. You don't mind if we all come, do you, little princess?
Hestia's jaw dropped as Athena, Artemis and Aphrodite's eyes widened.
Of course not, it's more fun with more people.
Lacey smiled at all the gorgeous ladies and pointed at Annabeth. Annie's boyfriend is coming with us as well. Athena's eyes widened again as Annabeth blushed at the mention of Percy in front of so many strangers and glared at her sister. He's not my boyfriend, you little troll. She was still a little dubious about so many people moving into the next house. She thought an old couple lived there.
And it was very strange that the mother of all the pretty ladies looked far too young to have so many daughters.
Then there was that one lady, Thea was what her mother called her. She gave her a very peculiar and warm feeling, like she had seen her somewhere before. Lacey laughed at her sister before she tugged at her dad's pant leg. You don't mind, do you, Daddy? Naruto forced a smile and tried to not to shake from nervousness, and no, the more the merrier.
Rhea gave everyone a sweet smile. Great, we'll see you all in a little while.
Athena and Aphrodite each gave Naruto a nervous smile as they walked away, but his mind was far too overworked to function properly.
Why the hell did the girls' teacher suddenly show up, and how did she know Athena and Aphrodite?
These thoughts haunted his mind, even as Lacey and Annabeth pulled him back into the house. He was in a daze.
Then it hit him like a brick. Tia Hestia.
He resisted the urge to palm his face and groaned, my gods, I'm such an idiot.
And just before Naruto closed his front door, he heard Aphrodite laughing very loudly. What the hell is going to happen now? A Father's Love, Chapter 8.
The silence was slightly unnerving. In the millennia that the goddesses had known the mother of the gods, the Titaness of motherhood and beauty, she had never seemed so amused. Instead of her usual warm and comforting eyes, she was gazing upon them like they were enacting a puppet show and she was the puppeteer. Even Athena, who was no stranger to using manipulation, felt very uncomfortable as she sat beside her sister in the small dining room. She had no idea why her grandmother decided to involve herself in the situation or knew what she was thinking.
Overall, it was quite intimidating.
So, started Aphrodite as she cleared her throat.
This sure is an unexpected pleasure.
Artemis and Athena nodded along, with the latter with a slightly forced smile.
Indeed, but if I may ask, why did you come here, grandmother?
Rhea was sipping on her cup of chia tea and merely smiled kindly at the girls.
I felt inclined to be closer to family, so I decided to move here along with Tia.
It's quite the convenient location, seeing how little Athena, Aphrodite and Artemis would all visit the next house at the same time. Rhea gently placed her porcelain cup on its plate and winked at the goddesses with a sly smile, and just between us women, the owner next door is so very sexy. Loud clatters could be heard as Athena, Aphrodite and Hestia simultaneously dropped their cups onto their plates, almost shattering them. Hestia stared at her mother in shock as her eyes widened considerably, utterly horrified at the idea of her mother pining over a mortal man. Then Athena and Aphrodite, in a very rare moment, actually thought along the same lines, both wondering if Rhea would be competition.
What in the name of order, mother?" cried Hestia loudly.
Rhea couldn't hold in it anymore and burst out a laugh, her delicate features shaking as she brushed away tears from her eyes.
"You should see all your faces."
All three goddesses sighed in relief and calmed down, but Rhea's laughter was still strong.
"Don't worry, I'm not interested in taking your little boyfriend."
Artemis sighed as she finished her tea. "If we're only going to be chatting about some boy, I think I'm just going to go back to my hunters."
"Oh no, you won't."
Rhea gave her granddaughter a pointed look. "The two little girls saw you with us this morning, so you're coming with us later."
"But grandmother?"
"No buts." Rhea crossed her arms and sternly stared at Artemis. "It's been a very long time since I've spent time with my little granddaughters and stepdaughter, so we're all going to stay for the day and have a nice time."
The Titaness smiled as Artemis relented and rested back on the seat, a tiny pout on her face.
"None of you have to worry about the others seeing all of us here and become suspicious. I've taken care of that."
"How?"
asked Athena, who had been worried that the combination their godly energies in one place might have attracted Olympus' attention. "Zeus gives me my own circle of privacy, so as long as I allow it, I can completely shroud all of you within my personal domain. I've been hiding all of you since this morning. If I hadn't, I have no doubt that Zeus would have already questioned all of you." Rhea smiled as a strange glint appeared in her eyes. "And you are very lucky that no one but me noticed you coming here 2 nights ago, Aphrodite." The goddess of love looked over at her stepmother and bit her lips. "I'm not breaking any rules coming here. Love is my domain, and my being with Naruto is a part of it." "Technically, yes, but we all know that it's stretching it a little." "It doesn't matter, I'm not going to leave Naruto again." Aphrodite crossed her arms and closed her eyes. "This is something that I am extremely committed to and no one can change my mind."
"Yes, you were quite clear on that,"
muttered Artemis softly, still a little uncomfortable about Aphrodite's threat to her and her hunters. Athena couldn't help but frown at her words. "If only I have the same determination as her in love." Hestia sighed and shook her head. "I never thought you'd actually go this far. You are abandoning your temple, your immortal children and most of your duties just to be with Naruto. Far be it from me to say anything about committing to family, but this is a little too extreme, Aphrodite.
As the goddess of love, I am only pursuing what I deem as real love.
I've never loved anyone like I love Naruto, and I'm sure that I know better than anyone else that this is something extremely rare, especially among us immortals, so don't even bother trying to convince me otherwise." Hestia frowned, but Rhea placed a hand on hers before she could continue. "Let it be, Tia, we should respect Aphrodite's own choices. It's her life and she alone should make the decisions."
Aphrodite smiled and nodded, and Rhea gave her a knowing look.
If she somehow managed to convince Hera to stand on her side, I'm sure that this is truly something special.
Aphrodite's eyes widened as the other goddesses grew interested. "What do you mean, Hera, mother?"
Rhea smiled at her eldest daughter and winked. "If I'm not wrong, I think I smell the distinct aroma of the Hera's sacred bath on Aphrodite, and if Hera allowed her to use it, I'm sure the reasons behind this relationship are quite strong."
What?"
cried the three goddesses in shock.
Athena shakily turned to Aphrodite and stuttered. "Why, you mean you actually regained your virginity and gave it to Naruto?"
Aphrodite merely turned to the side with her eyes still closed, answering the question.
I never thought
you'd go this damn far."
Artemis was seriously wondering if someone had replaced the Aphrodite she knew.
The love goddess she knew would switch between lovers every single day and would have more demigod children than Apollo. She would have never even imagined that she would do something so extreme. Something was seriously wrong with her and the man she loved.
"All right, who in the name of Hades is that man next door? What in order did he do to you?"
"Nothing, we simply love each other." Hestia gently reached for Aphrodite's hand and gave it a light squeeze. "Please tell us this, Aphrodite, how is your relationship with Naruto different from the ones you've had before?"
What is so special about him that you are willing to go so far? I doubt even Adonis or Ares would have such an effect on you. Aphrodite scoffed at the ridiculous notion and crossed her arms. There's no doubt, Naruto is the only person I would do this for. I'm really interested. Ria smiled as she rested her chin on her hands. He is handsome enough and seemed like a cute father, but give us details. How did you two meet? Before Aphrodite could speak again, Ria stopped her. Wait, Athena met him first, so you tell us first. Everyone looked over at Athena, who sighed and crossed her arms. Come on, little granddaughter, tell grandmommy about you little boyfriend. With a roll of her eyes, Athena spoke. Well, we met at New York State University. Daddy, can you change the cat litter? Annabeth held Einstein in her arms as she brushed its gray fur into a shining luster. It's Lacey's turn, but she won't do it. Toothless didn't even use the litter. Lacey glared at her sister as she finished getting dressed. Your giant gray ball of fur did all that and I'm not cleaning it. It's disgusting. Your dragon left a huge mess last time and I changed it. Naruto sighed as he walked into the girls' bathroom with a garbage bag and new litter. Stop fighting, girls. Lacey, it's only fair that you change it this time. You both agreed upon the schedule and must follow it. It's your responsibility. Naruto handed his pouting daughter the garbage bag and patted her head. Come on, princess, I'll help you with it. Fine. Muttered Lacey as she stuck her tongue out at Annabeth. Annabeth scoffed and ignored her, but couldn't stop the smug smile from appearing on her face. She turned back to her kitty and combed through its soft fur. Its shade of gray was beautiful and very close to her own eyes. Gray eyes. The thought of her eyes reminded her of one of the beautiful ladies that just moved into the house next door. She had the same shade of gray in her eyes and she gave off a warm aura. Annabeth thought she might have imagined it, but she saw the woman's eyes soften as she looked at her. Her made Annabeth feel warm and cozy, not unlike her dad's hugs. I should talk to her later. Annie, said Naruto as he looked back at his princess. Einstein looks fine, go get dressed. The girl was still in her blue pajamas and nodded at her father, okay. Lacey, who had just finished with the littler, smiled and followed her sister. Wait, I'll come with you. The girl grabbed onto Annabeth's hand and grinned up at her. I won't let you dress the same as usual. Percy is coming over later and you should at least try to not look so boring. Annabeth sighed as she left the room. I do not look boring. You keep wearing only gray and blue, that's really boring. Lacey pulled her sister along as Toothless and Einstein trailed behind them. Come on, Daddy bought you that green sundress, right? Let's go try that out. The little girl giggled. You need to look pretty to get Percy to like you. I'll say this for the last time, I don't like Percy that way. I'm your cute baby sister, you don't need to lie to me. Naruto shivered at the conversation and just walked back into his living room. He had cleaned up a few days ago, but he was still fiddling around, trying to fix everything. If his assumptions were correct, 4 goddesses and 1 Titaness were coming to his home to help with Halloween, as ridiculous as that sounded. He still couldn't fathom the fact that Artemis and Hestia were at his front porch, and he was still in shock that the mother of the gods had moved into the house next door. He swore, when he heard Artemis call the gorgeous blonde woman Mother Rhea, his heart almost stopped. From what started out to be such a simple morning, it had certainly turned into the most stressful afternoon. With everything that had happened, Naruto's mind couldn't help but recall back to how Athena reacted to Aphrodite's words and how angry and passionate Aphrodite became when they wanted to take her back. 2 of the 4 most important females in his life were coming back into his life, and it was crazy exciting and frightening. Hopefully, the other 2 females, his 2 little princesses, would be happy that their mothers were back into their lives. I should vacuum the living room. So daring! Exclaimed Rhea with a grin. A university professor having a child with her own student, that is so controversial. Athena blushed and sent her grandmother a slight glare. Don't say it like that. She had been mocked more than once by Aphrodite saying that she liked to have kids with her students. It was not her fault that most of her top students were very intelligent.
He was my student, but he graduated before Annabeth was born. How boring Naruto must have felt, muttered Aphrodite. What did you two even do outside of school? Athena huffed and turned away. None of your business. Hestia sighed and rubbed her temples. Girls, don't fight. Artemis, seeing how the situation was once again turning into a spat between war and love, decided to speak up and intervene. So, what kind of course were you teaching at the time? The huntress didn't really care, but any subject would be better than Aphrodite hounding at Athena about her dates with men. He must have been a good student if he managed to gain your affection. Athena actually smiled and nodded. I was teaching historical warfare as well as military tactics at the time, and Naruto was the top student in both classes. She fondly thought back to the brilliant strategies her love had developed all those years ago before she continued. He was a business major, but took my classes as options, so I was skeptical about him at first. As the class went on, he managed to achieve full marks on every single paper and exam I assigned, and absolutely crushed every one of his classmates in a war simulation. Artemis crossed her arms and nodded. That is impressive. It's not common for such a young human to be so adept at warfare tactics. Indeed, said Athena. In the many years I have been teaching such classes, Naruto ranks among the top 5 students. Ria snacked on some potato chips and smiled at her granddaughter. So I'm guessing you made a brainchild with him right after he graduated? Graduated? Yes, I did. Naughty professor. Shut up, you damn pile of foam. So what else do you know about the man? Asked Hestia, trying to deter the group from descending into pointless insults. From what we all saw, he only lives with his daughters and doesn't seem to have any contact with his parents or other family members. Athena rested back on her seat and thought, I've never met anyone from his family. Aphrodite nodded along. She hadn't met any of the either. What I should add here is that Naruto cannot remember anything before his 16th birthday. He had an accident right before it, and after he awoke from a coma, all of his memories were gone. The wisdom goddess crossed her arms. I have tried on several occasions to rid him of his amnesia, but no matter how thorough I search his brain, I couldn't find any hidden or lost memories. I've tried the same thing, said Aphrodite with a frown. I tried to find any lingering feeling of love, be it from his parents or old lovers, but I couldn't find anything. His mind was void of any information before his 16th birthday, and no matter how much power I use, nothing would surface. That is certainly interesting, said Ria with her head resting on her hands. A case of amnesia that both of you can't fix is quite rare and unexplainable. Yeah, when I have time, I'll try to bribe Apollo to come heal it for me. Aphrodite wondered if she could offer even more glamorous sex lives to the sun god's children. Artemis scoffed. Don't give him too much credit. He may be the god of healing, but I'm sure his skills have dulled greatly after so many years of doing nothing. Do you know what kind of accident he was in? Asked Hestia with interest. It must have been something serious. Athena shook her head. When I checked the hospital database, all it said was someone found an unconscious young man in the middle of the university campus. He was transferred to the hospital and stayed there until he woke up a month later. He sure is mysterious for a mortal. Hestia nodded at her mother. I agree, this is certainly interesting. But anyway, we can get back to this later. Ria smiled at Aphrodite. I think it's our goddess of love's turn to tell us how she met this nice young man. Aphrodite grinned, making Athena roll her eyes. Well, it all started when I walked into his adorable candy store. According to a list Aphrodite had written for him, Naruto had brought home 3 boxes of chocolate to hand out to the children. It was most of the cheaper stocks of his company, but was still quite good quality. The goddess had insisted that they get rid of all of it so they would have more space to place the new inventory she had ordered from France. Naruto wasn't about to argue with the mother of his youngest daughter, so he did as he was told. Placing the boxes next to the table, Naruto refocused and started to fiddle with the pumpkins on the kitchen countertop. He had bought 3 of them, so it was enough both his girls and would still have one for backup. Though now he might have to give it to some of the goddesses to carve for themselves. "Daddy, come here for a second." Naruto wiped his hands before walking upstairs to his girls' bathroom. His nerves were getting a little better, but his eyes were still trying as hard as they could to spot any specks of dirt of food on the ground. The last thing he wanted was for a goddess to find a piece of chocolate stuck to her feet. Thankfully, his staircase was perfectly clean, and he walked up to his daughters with relief. "What is it, princess?" Lacey grinned, looking adorable in a pink sundress. "We're done dressing, now it's your turn." Annabeth, who was dressed in the new green sundress her dad had bought for her, shook her head with a sigh. As if it was not enough that her little sister forced her to dress up like a doll for a simple Halloween preparation day, she was going to force their dad into the clothes of her choice. Frankly, Annabeth would prefer her dad to dress as he usually did. He already had enough women attracted to him, so looking more handsome would just be more annoying. Naruto sighed and patted Lacey's head. "I'm already dressed." His daughter shook her head and poked him in the stomach. "No, you look like you always do. You can't always wear the same black shirt and gray jeans. Sometimes you have to change your image so other people will not get bored." The elder blonde looked scandalized. "I don't look boring." "You look good, Daddy, but if you keep looking the same way every day, it will get boring." His daughter dragged him by the finger and pushed him into his room. "I picked out some clothes for you, so get changed already." "You know I'm the parent, right?" Lacey stuck her tongue out at her daddy. "But I'm better at these things." She closed the door and turned away. "Miss Hess and her sisters and mom will be here soon, so hurry up." Naruto smiled and chuckled as he shook his head. "Lacey is so much like Aphrodite, it's crazy." He looked down at the clothes his daughter chose for him and smiled again. "But this isn't so bad, way better than that weird underwear Aphrodite bought me." Outside of the room, Lacey grinned and gave her sister an thumbs up. Annabeth rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "Why are you doing this, Lace?" Her gray eyes were oddly intimidating as she stared down at her younger sister, but the girl just smiled back at her. "You're trying to make Dad dress up for the ladies next door. I know we both don't like it when the moms at school look at Daddy, but I think that red-haired lady next door looks great with him." Lacey giggled and jumped up and down excitedly. "Did you see her? She's beautiful and I think she will make a great girlfriend for Daddy. We don't even know her. What would we do if they do get together and she turns out to be a bad person?" Lace gave her a blank look, making her sigh. "Besides, I am more interested in the lady with the gray eyes." Annabeth leaned against the wall and thought back to the lady. "She seemed really smart and is also very pretty, so if Dad were to choose one of them, I would prefer him choosing her." "No way, the red-haired lady is much more beautiful." "It's not all about looks, Lace." Annabeth smiled and poked her sister's forehead as she grabbed her hand. "Come on, let's go watch a movie or something before those ladies come over." "Can we please watch How to Train Your Dragon?" "No." Unknown to them, Naruto was standing quite close to his door and had heard everything his daughters said. Not only was he shocked, but he had to wonder if they subconsciously felt some sort of connections with their mothers. Lacey wanted him to be with Aphrodite and Annabeth clearly preferred Athena. He sighed and combed his fingers through his hair, wondering what would happen from that point on. This is going to be very unique day. "All right, in the middle of a restaurant?" muttered Hestia with a scandalized expression and a killer blush. Rhea chuckled as she snacked on some potato chips. "That is daring, I must say." Aphrodite laughed and nodded. "You should have seen Naruto's face when the waiter caught us. His face was so red and hot it was like it was glowing. He pulls his pants up as fast as he could and just pulled me out of the restaurant. Most people in the lounge were staring at us and the waiter didn't know if he should follow after us or not." The goddess clutched her stomach and wiped some tears from her eyes. "I swear, he was fidgety for the 2 weeks and wouldn't even drive anywhere near that restaurant." Rhea was chuckling and nodded. "That's certainly understandable. I can't believe you tried to seduce Naruto in public." Athena glared at Aphrodite with her arms crossed with a disgusted look on her face. Hey, there is nothing wrong with having a little fun while waiting for a meal, and he was really enjoying it until the waiter caught us."
Can we please talk about something else?
Artemis was rubbing her temples and sighed for the 100th time in the past hour. This subject is tedious, repulsive, and would make most of my hunters want to shoot you.
Aphrodite huffed, you and your virgin Girl Scouts will never understand.
Rhea chuckled, 3 out of 5 here will never understand.
Hestia rolled her eyes, really, mother?
Rhea kissed her daughter's cheek before she turned back to the love goddess. But going back on subject, Aphrodite, I think it is time for you to tell us why you love this man so much. The love goddess noticed that everyone was staring at her, and she merely smiled. I didn't really understand it at first, even as the goddess of love I didn't know what I was feeling. She looked over at Athena and saw the wisdom goddess' widened eyes, no doubt seeing the similarities of their situations. I knew full well that I loved Naruto, perhaps much more than all my other lovers, but it felt very peculiar.
It wasn't solely based on sex or physical attraction, it was also very comfortable and natural.
I just feel right when I'm with him, just really happy.
That's almost exactly how I feel right now,
muttered Athena inwardly, her mind racing at the speed of light to analyze her situation. That sounds really precious, said Hestia with a smile.
I'm happy for you.
Aphrodite smiled back at Hestia, who was probably her best friend, before continuing. I was deeply in love with him, so you could imagine how difficult it was for me to leave him when Lacey was born. Rhea and Hestia smiled sadly and nodded. I tried to forget about it and get on with my life, but I just couldn't. I have never felt so strongly about someone before. I started to watch Naruto from Olympus, and the more I do, the deeper I was falling in love with him, especially when I see him playing with Annabeth and Lacey. He is a great father, muttered Athena softly. Yeah, out of all the fathers of my children, he is by far the best. Aphrodite smiled warmly and closed her eyes. I guess that was when I really started to see how special Naruto really is and how irresponsible all the other men had been.
Rhea smiled, I'm guessing this is almost when you spoke with Hera?
Aphrodite nodded. I went to Lady Hera to ask if I could use her bath. I wanted Naruto back and figured that the results of the bath would make things easier. What I didn't expect was for Lady Hera to tell me why I am feeling so strongly for Naruto. Athena stared at the love goddess, making sure to listen attentively. She made me understand that I feel a familial love for Naruto. She smiled at the others sweetly. I love him as a lover and as a father of my little girl, and that makes all the difference in the world. Lady Hera said that this is what a wife would feel for her husband. It is completely different than what a normal boyfriend and girlfriend would feel for one another.
Aphrodite's smile widened, and she's right.
Wow, mumbled Artemis as she stared at Aphrodite, who looked happier and more genuine than the huntress had ever seen. Hestia reached for Aphrodite's hand and gave it a light squeeze. I've never seen you like this.
Well, I've never felt like this.
Aphrodite's smile was perpetual as she looked at the other immortals, and I really do think this is the real thing.
Rhea's smile grew as she grinned at her stepdaughter. What do you mean?
If all things go my way, I'm going to make Naruto my immortal husband.
Athena's eyes widened and almost crushed the armrests on her chair.
Hephaestus and I had never been husband and wife, and I'm going to officially divorce him and marry Naruto.
Are you sure?
Asked Hestia with great shock. An immortal husband is literally forever, for the rest of your life, which may be eternity. Eternity, you will always be with him.
Yeah, do you need to think about it more?
Rhea was happy for her stepdaughter, but worried that her decision was still premature. I know you've had a daughter with him and have been with him for a few months before, but that might be too little time for you to decide. Aphrodite merely gave the all a smile. I know full well what I am doing. As the goddess of love I can usually predict how long love between two people can last, and I can't see an end to this one. She finished her glass of orange soda and grinned. This is also the beginning of my life as a mother. Lacey is still young and it's not too late for me to be a part of her life.
Artemis sighed, so you're really not going back to Olympus?
Of course, I'm going back. I have to keep Naruto a secret from most male gods until I marry him.
Rhea and Hestia nodded in agreement at her words.
I'm going to be on Olympus every few days and attend the council meetings, but other than that I'll be with Naruto. Know that I cannot hide you and the girls forever. I will only shroud your presence for this week, but after that the other Olympians will be able to sense you. Rhea crossed her arms and stared pointedly at her stepdaughter. In the end, you are stretching the limits of your domain and it would be against my personal standards to hide you from the council.
I understand, I'll make sure to hide my presence to the bare minimum.
Aphrodite stood and stretched her arms, and don't worry about Naruto and the girls, I may not fight often, but I am quite sure that I can defeat most of the council. If Lord Zeus and Lord Poseidon don't come after me, I should be fine.
Let's see if she would still say that when Ares come for them, thought Artemis while shaking her head.
Now, I think it's time to head over and carve some pumpkins. Rhea sighed, but smiled afterwards.
Okay then, let's go meet my step-granddaughter and great-granddaughter.
Hestia smiled and stood as well, and smiled when she saw the irritated look on Artemis' face.
Come on little niece, I'll bake your favorite peanut butter cookies and make you shepherd's pie for dinner.
The huntress' eyes sparkled as she looked up at her aunt, making her giggle. And if you are willing to help out with the pumpkin carvings, I'll make you sticky pudding with coconut ice cream for dessert.
Trying not to drool, Artemis stood up. Alright, let's go. Hestia happily pulled Artemis along by the arm and looked back at Athena. Come on Athena, you can go meet Annabeth.
The goddess of the hearth had noticed that Athena had been awfully silent since Aphrodite said she planned to marry Naruto, and she was getting concerned. The wisdom goddess stood with her usual confidence and dignity and nodded.
I know, let us go.
Her gray eyes were determined and focused, as if she was going in war. Hestia bit her lip as she noticed the look on Athena's face. The last time she had seen such an expression was during World War II.
It's time for my daughter to meet me.
As Aphrodite walked through the door, Rhea looked back at Athena, a little surprised at the intensity in her eyes.
Are you okay, sweetie?
Athena merely smirked and nodded. Definitely, I haven't felt this determined in a long time.
What do you mean? Asked Artemis curiously.
Let's just say that I'm sure of how I feel about Naruto now and I know what I have to do. Athena flicked several strands of her silky hair back as she stepped out of the door. I'm no longer confused and I'm no longer frustrated, everything is clear now and couldn't be simpler. The other immortals grew concerned at the power flowing from Athena and slowly followed after her. I know what I have to do and how to do it. Athena always has a plan and victory is always mine.
Hestia bit her lip again in concern. What are you going to do?
Rhea and Artemis stared along as Athena turned back with her intimidating gray eyes, exactly what Aphrodite is going to do, but faster. She gave a soft laugh as she continued her way to Naruto's home. I think it is time for the goddess of wisdom and battle strategy to have a husband.
What? What are you saying, Athena? Father is going to go crazy.
Athena just smiled and ignored the others behind her.
It's on, Aphrodite.
I love Naruto just as much as you do and I'm not going to lose to you. Opening his front door had never been so intimidating. When the mothers of his daughters were on the other side, Naruto wouldn't be surprised if his door were to blast to pieces. He could feel the vibrations behind the thin piece of wood and his hand was shaking on the doorknob, but with one final exhale, he opened the door.
Hey, Naruto. Hey, handsome. Naruto stared at Athena and Aphrodite with his teeth shaking.
When he was alone with one of them, everything was perfect, but when both of them were with him, he felt as if a nuclear bomb had been planted in his home, especially when they were both smiling at him. The two goddesses glanced at each other and both crossed their arms.
All is fair in love and war. Naruto gulped. Please, come in. A Father's Love, Chapter 9. You look so handsome. Naruto smiled at his lover, silently wondering how his little princess was so adept at choosing his clothes.
Instead of his usual gray jeans and black dress shirt, he was wearing his daughter's selection, which included a pair of black form-fitting jeans with a white belt, a simple purple t-shirt under a black sports coat that both did little to hide his muscular frame and a pair of black leather boots. It was much more formal and heavier than what he was used to, but seeing the guest list of the day, it should work fine.
Thanks, your daughter picked it out.
Naruto smiled as the love goddess giggled at the thought. She said I look boring with my usual clothes. It's better than that orange sweater you used to wear in class, said Athena, who was smiling at the father of her child. Even in the large symposium rooms, I could find you right away because of that monstrosity. Naruto chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. Well, you eventually talked me out of it. Standing in the small entrance of the home, the goddesses Athena and Aphrodite stood, smiling at their love. Rhea, Hestia and Artemis were slowly walking through the door, all wondering if Athena was being serious about finding a husband. They all knew that if Athena and Aphrodite were to fight over Naruto, it would be the Adonis incident with Persephone all over again, but greatly amplified. If Aphrodite really loves Naruto so much and if Athena were to plan to steal him for herself, it could result in cataclysmic destruction. The last thing they wanted to see was the city of New York burned to the ground under the two goddess power. Naruto glanced at the other goddesses standing behind the mothers of his children before looking back at Athena and Aphrodite. So, is everything okay? He had been worried about the implications of his loves coming to visit him so often and wondered if they would get in trouble. Nothing bad is happening, right? Aphrodite smiled and hugged one of his arms. Don't worry, everything is fine. Athena narrowed her eyes at the love goddess, but refocused on Naruto. Naruto. So, where are the girls? She asked with a sweet smile. I think it's time I officially meet my daughter. Naruto bit his lip and gestured to the living room. They're in the living room watching a movie. He stepped closer to the goddesses of love and war and whispered, please be discreet about this, okay? The girls never really asked about their mothers, but I'm sure that they really want to meet the two of you, so just be delicate about it. Trust me, Naruto, said Athena as she smiled and placed a soft hand on his cheek. The last thing I want is for either of the girls to be hurt or confused. I will ease into the fact that I'm Annabeth's mother. I won't tell her until I've gotten to know her and she feels comfortable towards me. Naruto smiled and nodded with a slight sigh of relief. Thank you. Aphrodite glared slightly at Athena for her intimate touches and grunted, come on all head, let's just go meet the girls. She pulled the wisdom goddess by the arm. I've waited a very long time for this, and don't you dare ruin it for me. The love goddess turned back to Naruto and smiled lovingly at him, and don't worry about me either, I'm sure Lacey and I will get along great. I know you will. Naruto could only wonder how much his youngest princess would love her mother. They were almost exactly the same person and he knew that they would utterly adore each other. Naruto watched as the loves of his life walked towards the living room, and he couldn't help but feel nervous at the sight. Ever since the days he first held his baby daughters in his arms, he had been wondering if they would ever meet their mothers. After many hours of wondering and dreams of it happening, he didn't know how to react when it was actually happening. He wanted nothing more than for his daughters to have a complete family, a mother and a father in their little home, and have a happy and safe childhood. Hopefully, with the goddesses back in his life, his daughters would have something like that. It is as they say, said a sudden voice that knocked Naruto out of his thoughts. You don't have to worry, they both love their daughters and would never hurt them. Hestia smiled at the father of the children and calmed him with her powers. I'm sure the girls will love having their mothers in their lives. Yeah, you're right. Naruto smiled at the kind goddess, and I guess I should have known who you were a lot sooner, Lady Hestia. Hestia smiled and waved it off. It's perfectly understandable, I'm not the most recognizable goddess. She turned to gesture to her mother and her niece with a smile, and while I'm quite sure you figured it out already, this is my mother, Rhea, the Titaness of motherhood and beauty and the mother of the Olympians. This is Artemis, goddess of the moon and hunt. Almost shivering at the piercing gaze of the goddess of the hunt, Naruto gave a bow. It's an honor, Lady Rhea, Lady Artemis. Rhea smiled and nodded at the young man. No need to be so formal, young man. She took off her jacket and looked rather casual for such a powerful woman. This is your home and we are here as visiting family. Just relax and treat us to a relaxing day of baking and carving. Naruto relaxed at Rhea's expression. She was just like Hestia with her warmness. I'll be sure to. And there is no need to be so frightened of me, muttered Artemis with her arms crossed. I will only turn men I detest into jackalopes, and so far, you have done nothing to wrong me. Naruto nodded. Thank you, Lady Artemis. Hestia smiled at the interaction and linked her arms with Artemis. Come on Artie, let's go see how your sister is doing. Lacey had her arms crossed as she pouted at her sister. No matter how much she plead to Annabeth, she won't let her watch How to Train Your Dragon and bullied her into watching Troy, a movie their dad had always tried to avoid showing them. Lacey understood why. No matter how cool or epic Annabeth thought the movie was, the blood and gore, and the slightly awkward love scenes made Lacey uncomfortable, though the characters in the film were very handsome, especially the long-haired blonde man and the young prince. Look at that. Lacey looked behind her and saw the pretty red-haired lady smiling at the television. Brad Pitt as Achilles and Orlando Bloom as Paris are just perfect, and Sean Bean as Odysseus is delightful. Aphrodite had seen Troy multiple times. She had always said that it was one of Apollo's best works in Hollywood. The goddess smiled down at her little girl and winked. Don't you think so, sweetie? Lacey grinned and nodded at the friendly lady. Yep, the long-haired blonde guy and the young prince are cool. As I've always said, this movie is vastly inaccurate. Athena smiled when she noticed her daughter look up at her the moment she said those words. She knew Annabeth would notice the inaccuracies and would appreciate the mention. They took out the majority of the Trojan War and Olympus involvement. I couldn't agree more, said Annabeth as she looked over at the gray-eyed lady. They completely omitted the apple of discord and the goddesses Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite. The two goddesses bit their lips at the reminder of their rather immature moments. I can't believe I actually cared if I was more beautiful than Hera and the pile of foam. I still think that Paris chose right. I am so much prettier than Owlhead and Lady Hera. They took out the choice of Paris, Aphrodite's gift, and how Poseidon and Athena worked together to create the chariot. Annabeth sipped on a cup of hot chocolate as she stared at the television. That was the disappointing part. I wanted to see how Poseidon made horses from sea foam. She smiled and looked at the ladies, though Athena was still the smarter one. Who cares about horses when you don't have the chariot cart? I can't agree more. Athena smiled at her daughter and nodded. People give Poseidon far too much credit sometimes, especially when it comes to the contest between being the patron god of Athens. Oh yeah, the olive tree is so much better. It's real genius that has many uses even in modern days. Athena sat down next to the girl with a perpetual smile. You're really smart, Annabeth. Not many people see the practicality of olives and how much it had affected Western civilization. The girl smiled and blushed a little. And I'm surprised you know so much about the Trojan War. Not many girls so young have such an interest in ancient warfare. It's not necessarily ancient warfare. I just really like studying on ancient Greek mythology. Annabeth smiled at the lady, happy that there was someone who she could talk to about such things. I really like reading about all the epic tales, especially the Odyssey. Odysseus is probably my favorite ancient Greek hero. He is just so smart about his quest. I agree. Instead of punching and slashing his way through like almost every other hero, Odysseus uses his mind and strategy to find his way back to his wife. Athena smiled and patted the girl's soft blonde hair that was so much like her father's. It's really a beautiful story. Yep, I make Dad read it to me before bed. Athena smiled proudly at her daughter. Unknown to most people, it was her who kept precise details of the many epic tales of the ancient time, and she whispered into the ears of Homer and Hesiod. Each and every one of their words had come from her, and their tales had become immortal. Athena was quite proud of her ancient texts and how prominent it still was in modern times, especially since it had become the favorite of her special daughter. Man, talk about a boring conversation, whispered Aphrodite while shaking her head. Even with Naruto's ever-whimsical personality, Annabeth still inherited far too much of her mother's obsession with literature. Lacey, who heard the lady's words clearly, giggled and covered her mouth. Yeah, Annie always talks about these things, and they are just so boring. Aphrodite winked at her daughter as she sat down next to her. I know, right? I don't get how she could go on and on about these things without falling asleep halfway through. You should listen to Annie talk about architecture. I swear it's better than Daddy's lullabies. Lacey giggled softly and tried to hide their conversation from her sister and the gray-eyed lady, who were still talking about some Greek poet. She gets mad at me when I fall asleep when she's talking, but it's hard to stay awake when it's so boring. Yeah, they expect us to pay attention and stay awake, and they just don't know how hard it is. Lacey nodded enthusiastically, ecstatic that the pretty lady was just like her. It's as if her clothes aren't boring enough, she muttered as she glanced at the outfit Athena was wearing. She looked like a librarian. Totally! Exclaimed Lacey as she leaned closer to the lady. Annie dresses like an old lady. Even when she goes to school to see her little boyfriend, she still chooses to wear her usual gray and blue clothes. I had to force her to wear that green sundress this morning. If I didn't, then Percy would just get tired of her boring clothes. Aphrodite kissed Lacey's forehead. You're really good at these things, aren't you? Yep. Lacey grinned and bounced slightly on the couch. Daddy says that I get it from my mommy. I bet my mommy is just the coolest lady ever. The goddess giggled and couldn't help but wrap an arm around her little girl's shoulders. You are just the cutest and sweetest girl ever. Naruto stood behind the four most important people in his life and rubbed his eyes. Ever since 6 years ago, when Annabeth first asked for her mommy, he had been hoping that one day, his little girls will get a chance to meet their mothers. For so many years, he had convinced himself that it was never going to happen. Goddesses were far out of reach and they had no care for his earthly woes, but he had been proven wrong. The sight of Annabeth chatting with Athena with sparkly eyes and of Lacey and Aphrodite laughing and giggling together brought him to tears. His family was complete. A soft hand patted his shoulder. You have a beautiful family. Thank you, Lady Hestia. Naruto wiped his eyes and smiled at the kind goddess. It's just a little surreal that my daughters are finally bonding with their mothers. Believe me, young man, started Ria as she smiled at the sight. Every mother in the world loves their children, and it is no different with goddesses. Leaving their babies with you are probably the most difficult things they will ever do, especially since they genuinely care for you, and now that they've finally met the little girls, their love for them will only grow. The titanis of motherhood gently held onto Hestia's hand. There is nothing stronger than a mother's love, young man, that I can assure you. Artemis smiled and nodded along, thinking about her own mother. I should go visit mother soon. I'll grab Apollo with me as well. I'm sure she'd want to see us after so long. Daddy! Cried Lacey as she saw her daddy standing behind them. Were you listening in? Aphrodite shook her head mockingly at Naruto with a sly wink. For shame, Naruto, this is private girl talk, no boys allowed. Don't worry, I didn't hear anything. Naruto lifted his little girl into his arms and smiled when she wrapped her little arms around his neck. He kissed her cheek and looked down at his lover. Come on, let's start carving pumpkins and baking cookies. He carried Lacey in his arms as he ruffled her hair. And yes, I did, but the dove cookie cutter for you, princess. His youngest smiled and nodded, thanks daddy. He smiled at his eldest, who was still watching a movie with her mother, and felt incredibly amused when he saw how similar they looked when they focused. Almost exactly like her mother, Annabeth's brows would furrow as she thought about the movie, the mistakes it made, and her gray eyes would darken whenever someone did something stupid. With both Annabeth and Athena sitting next to each other, Naruto marveled at how alike they looked. His daughter will grow up to be just as beautiful as her mother. Come on Annie, you can finish the movie later. Annabeth bit her lip and gave her dad a pleading look, but dad, Patroclus just died and Achilles is about to go crazy. Athena nodded as she crossed her arms. Yeah, this is one of the more accurate scenes of the movie. Artemis rolled her eyes and sighed. We all know how that ends. The huntress could still remember all the hunters she had gathered during the final moments of the Trojan War. The sack of Troy left hundreds of homes in ruin and Artemis saved most of the maidens before they were raped by the men. She also turned at least 200 men into jackalopes. Come on Thea, I want Tia's peanut butter cookies. The wisdom goddess sighed, fine. Annabeth stood along with the nice gray-eyed lady and walked up to her dad. So what are we going to do now? Naruto smiled and ruffled her princess curls. Let's bake some cookies. Over the years, Naruto had spent many hours in his kitchen, and he liked to think that he had mastered cooking and baking treats, but after seeing how a real master does it, he knew he was wrong. It was Hestia at first. The goddess' hands moved like the wind when handling the ingredients and mixers, but then Rhea stepped in. The mother of the gods was even more advanced. Her arms whipped the batters better and faster than his electric mixer. Between the two goddesses, they made over 100 cookies in less than 1 hour with only one oven. Naruto wondered if they used some magic to make his oven bigger. In the end, he just left his batter uncooked on the table. There was no point anymore. He settled with helping the girls clear the tables and clean the used plates. Don't feel bad, whispered a soft voice from his side. Those two are perhaps the best cooks that ever existed, so there is no shame in losing to them. Naruto smiled at his lover and discreetly gave her a wink. Losing is not the word, more like completely destroyed. He looked at his girls, who were both chowing down on the mountain of cookies with gleeful expressions on their greasy faces. But whatever, as long as the princesses likes the cookies. Aphrodite giggled, they aren't the only ones. Naruto looked over his shoulder and almost chuckled at the sight of Lady Artemis happily munching on her own platter of cookies. For the first time since he had first seen her, this was the first time he'd seen a smile on the goddess' face. He had to admit, when Artemis wasn't glaring at him with her scary piercing eyes, she was nearly as beautiful as Athena and Aphrodite. I'm guessing Lady Hestia and Lady Rhea's cooking is popular on Olympus? Oh yeah, said Athena, joining the conversation before Aphrodite could say anything. Aunt Hestia usually cooks for everyone during the Olympic Games, and sometimes we would have to stop some of the gods from eating too much before they compete. Despite being a little peeved that her privacy with Naruto was interrupted, Aphrodite giggled. Yeah, I still remember how Hermes lost the 100-meter dash because he ate too much. Hestia was happy, but he was groaning about losing to Apollo for the first time in 1,000 years. Naruto chuckled, he could only wonder how human the gods could act. All the mental images of the gods he had created in his mind after reading all his books were slowly changing into something else entirely. Okay, who wants to taste the cake frosting? Me. I do. I would love to. Annabeth and Lacey stared at Artemis, who couldn't help but appear flushed at everyone's stares. Her aunt and grandmother only smiled lovingly at her, but the amused smirk on Athena's face, the laugh of Aphrodite and the pursed lips of the mortal man made her incredibly embarrassed. And never mind. Oh, come on. Lacey giggled as she ran to Artemis and grabbed her hand. The frosting is going to be really good. Artemis stared at Aphrodite's daughter and couldn't help but smile at her. The little girl was adorable and she could never resist such a sweet smile. It reminded her of the younger hunters in her camp, and since Lacey was technically her little surrogate niece, Artemis just couldn't say no. She gave the girl a small hug and allowed her to pull her towards the frosting, with Lacey giggling innocently the whole way. I guess the daughters of Aphrodite could be really cute. Annabeth, who was enjoying tasting a frosting spoon with a bright smile, handed another spoon for Artemis, who smiled and accepted it. She was seriously starting to like her two little nieces, and if they ever needed protection from men, she would happily accept them into her hunt. Actually, she would invite them right then, but she doubts their parents would allow them to start hunting monsters. Rhea smiled and patted Artemis' head. Okay girls, have a taste. Hestia giggled at the sight and shook her head fondly. If only Persephone were here, she'd love the girls and the food. She smiled at Artemis, who looked like she was a little baby goddess again. Actually, she and Artemis might fight over the food, so I guess not. Oh, that is so cute. For once, Athena nodded along to Aphrodite's words. It's been a while since I've seen Artemis so giddy. Naruto smiled. My princesses can warm up to anyone, especially their aunts, it seems. In the next few hours, Hestia and Rhea made 6 cakes, each looking more gorgeous than the last. There were over 200 cookies on his dinner table, 6 cakes on the countertop, a never-ending supply of hot chocolate on the stove, and of course, 3 carved pumpkins in the living room. Naruto carefully took pictures of each of them. First, there was the one Rhea, Hestia, and Artemis carved, which looked amazing with countless small cuts and carvings that looked impossible, thanks to thousands of years using hunting knives. Artemis easily sliced up the pumpkin. Naruto smiled warmly when he saw the one Annabeth and Athena carved. It was a traditional jack-o'-lantern that was made into perfection. Every single cut was made precisely and carefully. It was as if the genius mother-daughter tag team measured every single cut and calculated on which part of the pumpkin's surface area should they start on. Everything was perfect, and judging on the smug smiles on Athena and Annabeth's faces, they thought so too. Oh, dear mothers of my children. Naruto couldn't help but laugh at the sight of Lacey and Aphrodite's pumpkin. Its face was made into a wink. Its opened eye was in the shape of a heart, and the smirk the mother and daughter carved almost looked like the Nike logo. There were stars and other hearts decorating the outer edges of the pumpkin, and to finish it off, one of them added some lipstick on it, pink lipstick. It was certainly unique, and based on the proud hug Lacey gave Aphrodite, Naruto was quite sure it was perfect for them, too. "There we go," said Athena with a smile. "The candle should hold nicely in the slight hole we made at the bottom." Annabeth smiled proudly at her pumpkin and nodded, "I agree." "That looks boring, Annie." Lacey shook her head at her sister, even when Annabeth glared at her. "It looks just like the usual pumpkins we see everywhere. Why don't you try changing it up a little, like we did?" She pointed at her winking pumpkin and smirked, "Ours look way cooler." "Yep," chirped Aphrodite as she gave her little girl a high five. "It's not boring," started Athena with her arms crossed. "It is traditional and is perfectly executed in every way." "Yeah, like very traditional, just like your clothes, Thea." "My clothes are not boring." "You'd be right if we were in the 50s. Aphrodite smirked as Athena started to seethe in anger, and she looked down at Annabeth. "Listen to me, Annie, traditional isn't always good. Sometimes you have to be innovative and try new things to look gorgeous." "That's what I always say to her." Lacey nodded up at the love goddess as she pointed to Annabeth. "Any more plain gray shirts and blue jeans, and she'd turn into an old lady." "I am not an old lady." Annabeth glared at her sister as Athena glared at Aphrodite. "And gray and blue looks good to me." Lacey sighed and shook her head. "Who cares if you like it? What would you do when your boyfriend thinks you're boring?" "I don't have a boyfriend." Naruto sighed and just sat down on the couch, rubbing his temples as he tried to think of ways to stop the argument. It was fine when it was only his two daughters, but with their mothers also going at it, he was a little intimidated. Off to the side, Rhea and Hestia were simply smiling at the conversation. They were happy to see such similarities between mothers and daughters. Artemis, though, just didn't care and continued to snack on the never-ending supply of cookies. Ding dong. Naruto looked up at his doorbell ringing, but he wasn't as fast as Lacey. "Ha!" The little girl grinned as she pointed at the door. "Percy is here, so how about we ask him if you're boring?" "Don't you dare, you annoying little troll." Naruto sighed and headed for the door, hoping the pointless bickering would stop soon. He was actually looking forward to having Sally and Percy over, even though it was a little weird now that Aphrodite told him about Sally's feelings for him. It was nice to have other normal people in the house. He had gotten used to having the immortals in his home in the past few hours, but it was still a little more relaxing to know that he wasn't the only non-godly person in his home. Even his princesses were half goddesses. "Hey Sally," greeted Naruto as he smiled at his best employee. The pretty brunette smiled back at her boss. "Hey Naruto, sorry we're a bit late." "No problem." Naruto smiled down at Percy, who looked up at him with a happy grin. "And Percy, you look taller every time I see you." He ruffled the boy's hair, chuckling at the smiling on his face. "You are going to be taller than me soon." "Hi, Sally." Annabeth sneaked out behind her father's legs and smiled at her best friend's mother. "It's nice to see you again." Sally giggled and nodded at the smart girl. "Nice to see you too, Annabeth." The daughter of Athena smiled before she grabbed Percy's hand and pulled him in the house. "Come on, seaweed brain, come on in." Percy smiled and rolled his eyes. "Relax, wise girl." Naruto chuckled at the nicknames and invited Sally inside. "Yeah, please come in, Sally." He led the woman into the living room with a smile. "There are some people I want to introduce you to." With Annabeth walking Percy in ahead of them, he led his employee inside, looking back to all the goddesses and titanes sitting on his couches. "You've already met Dite," he said without his daughters listening, since for all they know, he had only met the red-haired lady that morning. "These are my neighbors, they just moved in recently and came to help out for Halloween." "That's nice," said replied with a sweet smile. Naruto gestured to Athena first, then moved to the others. "This is Thea, Artie, their mother Rhea, and of course, Ms. Hess, who just moved next door." "Ms. Hess," greeted Sally with a smile. "It's nice to see you again." Hestia stood and gave the woman a warm smile. It's nice to see you too, Mrs. Jackson. She gestured to the others and smiled again. My sisters and mother and I just moved next door, so we came to help out for Halloween. Rhea smiled. Yeah, the girls are adorable, so we came to bake them some cookies.
Yeah, it's so fun.
Aphrodite stood and stepped next to Sally to whisper in her ear. By the way, the girls don't know about Naruto and I, so please keep quiet about it.
Sally nodded with a small smile. Got it.
Naruto raised an eyebrow at the silence from Athena and Artemis, who both looked at Sally with frowns.
Dite!
Cried Lacey happily as she gestured to Percy, who was still quietly chatting with Annabeth in the corner about something. No doubt the daughter of Athena was telling the boy her demands of the day.
That's the Percy I was talking about. Yes, I see.
Aphrodite forced a smile at her daughter and nodded.
Nice-looking boy.
Hestia took Sally's arm and gestured to the kitchen. Come on Sally, we made some cookies.
Come try some with Percy.
Sally smiled at the idea. Hestia led her into the kitchen and called Annabeth, Lacey and Percy to follow her. Come on kids, come have some more cookies.
Yeah, the cookies are amazing. Annabeth pulled Percy along with a smile.
Lacey winked at Aphrodite and mouthed, I told you they liked each other. After the kids along with Hestia and Sally stepped into the kitchen, Naruto turned to the goddesses and Rhea with a raised eyebrow. They were all silent and the mood felt very serious. It was as if something really bad had happened.
Even Aphrodite had a frown on her face. Is something wrong? Ignoring her lover for the moment, Aphrodite turned to Athena. That boy, you sensed it too, right?
Athena nodded with a deep frown, her gray eyes hardening as she crossed her arms.
He's of the sea, those green eyes of his prove it all.
So that stupid barnacle beard broke his oath as well, muttered Athena darkly. Why am I not surprised?
Artemis sighed and shook her head. I'm guessing father doesn't know about him yet, or else he'd be dead. Aphrodite turned to Rhea. Did you know about this, Lady Rhea?
Yes, I did. Hestia noticed it the day she met the boy. The mother of the gods frowned and closed her eyes. Believe me, I gave Poseidon a stern talking to, but in the end, we can't change the fact that the boy was born. She gave the younger immortals a rather serious stare. We must not allow his existence to leak out. As dangerous as his presence is, he is my grandson and I do not want to see him end up like my little granddaughter, Talia.
Okay, what's going on? Asked Naruto, looking at Aphrodite and Athena.
Naruto, started Aphrodite with a frown on her face. That Percy boy, he is like Annabeth and Lacey. Naruto's eyes widened at her words. He is a demigod, precisely, he is a son of Poseidon.
Poseidon?
One of the big three, god of the seas and king of Atlantis, muttered Rhea with a shake of her head, and my second youngest son.
Dumbass kelp for brains, whispered Athena under her breath.
There is nothing we can do about it now, said Artemis as she stood up. Let's just ignore it for now and continue what we're doing naturally. If we don't say anything or act any differently, father shouldn't be able to sense him. She sighed and shook her head as she looked at Naruto, but you shouldn't have him and the two girls together all the time. With all three demigods together at once, their scent will be much stronger and will attract much more monsters.
Naruto nodded, I understand.
Athena stood and gestured to the kitchen. Come on, let's just keep on doing what we were doing.
Right, said Rhea with a smile.
We still have to go shopping for costumes.
Olympus, Ares Temple.
For the past month, the god of war had been angry at the goddess of love. They had been together for thousands of years, but for the past few years, the goddess had been giving him the cold shoulder. Even after he killed Adonis all those centuries ago, Aphrodite had only been angry at him for one day. Ares just couldn't figure out what he did wrong. Something must have happened to make his lover completely avoid him, and not understanding the reason behind it made Ares want to go on a rampage. Where the fuck are you, Dite? Cried the god of war angrily inwardly, his fiery eyes melting his sunglasses. He hadn't gotten laid by the goddess of love for over 6 years and he was seriously missing it. She was the most beautiful woman in existence and no one else could compare to her.
Ares had a serious case blue balls and he knew only one goddess would satisfy him.
Now if only he could remember where she was 6 years ago, which one of her human lovers was she with 6 years ago? The god of war had a feeling that the love goddess was still with that same human, and that just didn't sit well with him.
When I find that human, I'll rip him to shreds.
Eros! Cried Ares as loud as he could for his son with Aphrodite.
Come help me, I need to find your mom.
A Father's Love, Chapter 10. With the latest news of Percy being a son of Poseidon and the disturbing thought of Sally being a lover of the god of the seas, Naruto thought the gathering would have been awkward and uncomfortable, but he was wrong. Everything was back to normal and the immortals were being just as cheerful and happy as before. Artemis had eaten another 50 cookies. Even Athena, who was the angriest when she found out about Percy being Poseidon's son, was once again chatting with Annabeth, though Naruto did notice that she was trying to isolate her daughter from Percy.
I guess Athena and Poseidon really do hate each other. Then came the real highlight of the day, costume shopping.
Every year, Naruto would bring his girls to the small little costume shop near their home, and it was no different this year, except for the fact that he walked into the crowded store with 5 breathtakingly beautiful women. The moment Naruto and his company walked into the store, almost everyone stopped to stare at them.
Some of the wives in the store immediately glared at their husbands for staring. It was already troublesome when Artemis and Hestia walked in. They had attracted every man's attention with their stunning beauty, but because they were so eye-catching, every single person noticed Athena and Rhea when they stepped in after. As if the men in the store weren't jealous enough, Aphrodite skipped into the store with her gorgeous smile. At that moment Naruto could feel the amazement of the normal people.
"Okay," chirped Rhea as she smiled at the group, "let's find some costumes." Naruto was still trying to regain his composure when everyone divided themselves into groups and headed off around the store.
"Dite, the princesses are over here,"
cried Lacey as she basically dragged her new favorite person into the princess section. Aphrodite happily followed her daughter and giggled at her. "Oh, these are so cute."
"Come on, seaweed brain."
Percy rolled his eyes at Annabeth and ran after her. "What's the rush, wise girl?" Sally and Athena were following their children with the latter's mind trying to figure out ways to separate the sea spawn from her daughter. Percy looked far too much like Poseidon for her liking.
"Oh, I like this Aquaman one."
"Yes, definitely far too much like Poseidon."
"Tia, you'd look adorable in this."
Rhea had dragged Hestia and Artemis into the farthest section of the store and something caught her eye.
"And it's perfect for your innocent and warm look."
"Mother, I may sometimes use my child form, but this is a little too childish."
Hestia held up a little Red Riding Hood costume and sighed.
"You have to remember that I'm your eldest child. I'm even older than Hades." The last time Hestia saw her brother, he looked like he aged 10,000 years, and it made her feel old.
"Nonsense, you'd look great in it."
Rhea turned to Artemis. "Don't you think so, Artie?"
"I think Aunt Hestia might be more suitable with this."
The huntress held up a cosplay of Azula, from Avatar: The Last Airbender, with a small smile.
"She does have absolute control over fire and can be pretty scary when she glares at you." Hestia frowned. "I am not scary."
Artemis smirked and shook her head. "Last time Boreas came to report to Father with Kion, she deliberately hid outside of the throne room because you were attending the hearth inside. I saw her sneaking glances at you and shivering when your power flared as you tended the hearth." Rhea laughed and nodded. "Sweetie, as much as everyone loves you, you are extremely powerful and can be very scary when you want to."
"Well, I don't do it on purpose,"
mumbled Hestia as she accepted the Azula costume. Naruto sat back with his travel mug of coffee and just watched his friends and family run around the store. It was great to see such harmony between his little girls and their mothers and aunts.
Even sitting down at the edge of the store, Naruto could hear Lacey's laughter and Annabeth occasionally yelling at Percy.
Even the other goddesses' laughter could be heard from where he was. He almost gave a chuckle when he noticed Rhea and Artemis drag Hestia into one of the dressing rooms. He could only wonder how within a few days, his life could have changed so much. All of a sudden, the mothers of his children were back into his life and decided to bond with their daughters, a wish Naruto had hoped would come true for a long time.
"Daddy!"
cried his little girl as she ran towards him wearing an adorable blue princess costume with a silvery tiara on her head.
What do you think? You look adorable, sweetie.
Naruto hugged his daughter to his chest and kissed her lovingly on the forehead, making her giggle.
She certainly does.
Naruto looked up and was momentarily stunned to see Aphrodite wearing her own princess costume, which failed her hide her beauty as a goddess. Hers was pink instead of blue, but was basically the same design as Lacey's, and her tiara was gold instead of silver. Though just like many of the adult versions of costumes, it revealed an alluring amount of cleavage, and it was making Naruto a little excited. She's much cuter than any of the Disney princesses we see on television. Lacey smiled at her mother happily. Doesn't Dite look amazing?
Yes, absolutely gorgeous.
The goddess smiled and kissed Naruto on his cheek. You're so sweet. Lacey giggled at the interactions between her daddy and her new favorite lady, Kissy, Kissy. Naruto smiled at Lacey and lifted her into his arms. Okay, let's go see if your sister is finished with her costume.
I'm finished.
Annabeth and Athena stepped out of their dressing rooms and walked up to Naruto and Lacey. It was an adorable sight. Even Aphrodite smiled when she saw them. The mother and daughter were both wearing the same costume, Lady Liberty. Annabeth was grinning ear to ear as she held the plastic torch on her hand, waving it at her dad and sister. Athena just smiled down at her daughter, looking regal and elegant in the costume. It was as if she was Lady Liberty herself.
Oh, if only they knew. You two are adorable, exclaimed Aphrodite with a happy smile.
If Annabeth had dark hair, you two could be twins.
Athena smiled proudly and patted her daughter's shoulder. Yep.
Naruto chuckled and patted the spiky hat of Annabeth's costume, making her giggle up at him. Great choice in the costume, Annie. He had read that some people say that the Statue of Liberty was based on the goddess Athena, so it was just perfect for Annabeth.
You should see Percy's costume, said Annabeth with a giggle.
I still think it's awesome, wise girl.
Sure it is, honey.
Sally, wearing a mermaid costume, smiled at her son who was having a blast wearing an Aquaman costume with a built-in seahorse. She couldn't blame her son for his slight obsession with the ocean. He was just being his father's son. It only made things more interesting when the costume came with a golden trident. Sally smiled. If only Poseidon could see Percy at that moment. The seahorse thing is pretty poorly made, but the trident looks good.
Naruto smiled and nodded. I do like the trident.
Athena sighed, just like Barnacle Beard. She whispered under her breath. Aphrodite smiled at the scene and shook her head fondly. If that boy starts wearing Hawaiian shirts, I would start laughing.
Oh, you all look so cute.
Rhea walked up to the ground wearing a fairy godmother costume and happily smiled at her granddaughter, great-granddaughter, grandson, stepdaughter and step-granddaughter. It was hilarious how they all managed to dress up in a way that reflected their domains and how the parents and children all dressed up in the same themes. The mother of the gods was seriously starting to adore Halloween and might actually plan something for it next year so the other gods could participate. She could already see herself forcing Zeus to dress up as Thor.
The girls are absolutely adorable.
Rhea turned back to Artemis and Hestia. Look at them, that little princess dress and little Lady Liberty dress. Hestia, actually wearing the Azula costume, smiled and nodded. They do, especially with Thea and Dite wearing the same things. We shouldn't be too surprised that Thea chose Lady Liberty to wear. Artemis, dressed as Katniss from the Hunger Games, smiled and gave her sister a wink. I heard somewhere that it was based off this Greek goddess, and you know Thea, always obsessed with Athena.
Yeah, I know, right? Added Aphrodite.
Ha, ha, replied Athena dryly.
Just like how you are addicted to shooting people with arrows.
Only bad men, sister. Artemis smirked as she crossed her arms. If she was in the Hunger Games, everyone else would be doomed.
Okay, we're done now, right?
Asked Naruto as he started his way to the register.
Oh no, we're not. What do you mean? Asked the man as he looked back at Aphrodite.
The love goddess grabbed her lover's arm and pulled him back. We still have to find a costume for you. She grinned as Naruto gulped at the expression on his lover's face. The last time he saw such a playful look on her face, he ended up giving her a striptease in the bedroom.
It's okay, I still have my old vampire costume at home.
Oh, screw that impulsai wannabe.
Aphrodite giggled as she dragged Naruto over to the men's section. We're going to find you something cool for tonight.
Ignoring the pleas of her lover, Aphrodite's eyes gleamed as she scanned all the costumes on the racks, particularly the sexy ones.
Where are the sexy policeman costumes?
Hestia and Sally looked scandalized as Athena glared at her rival. Dite, there are children here. She marched up to them and yanked Naruto over to her side. Let's just get him someone normal, we don't want to scar the girls for life.
How is a nice set of Spartan armor going to scar them? Just get him the astronaut costume over there. No, I want to see some skin.
You're disgusting.
Oh, like you don't want to. Shut up, you dumb pile of foam. Why don't you go weave a basket and leave us alone, Minerva?
I won't let you ruin his image. Naruto's arms were starting to hurt, but he was much more concerned about bewildered expressions on his daughters' faces. Lacey had a confused smile on her face. She was obviously too young to really understand the situation, but she was happy about her daddy being so close to the two pretty ladies, especially Dite. Annabeth, on the other hand, clearly had a much more calculative stare. Her gray eyes were hiding her thoughts, but Naruto could tell that his daughter was running her amazing brain as fast as she could to deduce the situation, and it was very unnerving. He knew he had to stop the struggle, but it was near impossible. There was no good outcome. If he told Aphrodite to stop first, she would be mad, and the same would happen if he had told Athena. Therefore, Naruto did the only possible good course of action. He looked over at Lady Hestia and Lady Rhea for help.
Okay, that's enough. Surprisingly, it was Artemis who stopped the bickering goddesses. We are in the middle of a store, and the two of you are embarrassing us.
She glared at the other two goddesses and held her plastic bow tighter. So shut up and just let the man choose his own costume. Naruto chuckled at the expression of embarrassment on Athena's face as she looked away. Clearly, she had expected to act in such a way in public.
Aphrodite, on the other hand, just huffed and glared back at Artemis. It's okay, Daddy.
Lacey ran up to her daddy and pulled him along by the hand.
I'll choose a costume for you. Oh, no you don't.
Annabeth just knew her sister would choose something ridiculous for their dad, and she didn't need that extra embarrassment.
I'm going to choose one for Dad. No, you're too boring,
cried Lacey as she pulled her daddy along. Annabeth pulled him back and tried to kick Lacey away. I'm not going to let you embarrass us again. Artemis groaned and rubbed her temples. This is going to take a while. Rhea was laughing as Hestia kept shooting her stern stares. It had been a very long time since the mother of the gods had so much fun. It was utterly adorable to see the interactions between the goddesses and their daughters, especially when it comes to Naruto.
That young man certainly made their eternally fighting family very interesting and entertaining.
Rhea had half a mind to record the scene for Apollo. She had a feeling that it'd be very successful as a sitcom. All the while, Percy looked at his favorite male role model and shook his head with a terrified look on his face. Girlfriends were scary and they like to push people around. The other boys at school may be right, girls are just so troublesome. It had been perhaps the longest day Naruto had ever experienced. When night had finally arrived, Naruto felt as if a whole year had passed. His body was aching and his mind was exhausted. Trying to remain neutral between Aphrodite and Athena had thoroughly rendered his brain into a dried heap. Even at dinner, the two goddesses had been glaring at each other with him in between them, and Naruto actually felt sparks on energy shooting from their eyes. Even with a bowl of steaming ramen in front of him, he had a hard time eating with his nerves being constantly plucked. It was perhaps even worse after dinner, when the goddesses all came back to his home to watch a Halloween movie. Percy and Sally, along with Annabeth and Lacey, were fine and oblivious, but it was a little hard for Naruto to enjoy the movie when Athena was busy glaring at him for hugging Aphrodite around her waist the whole time. But finally, after an entire day of silent politics, he was back into his bedroom, his original bedroom, alone.
It would appear that without Aphrodite present, Naruto's bedroom would revert back to its original form. He was a little delighted. He loved having his room transformed into a romantic candle-lit haven, but without his lover present, it was a little redundant. Nonetheless, he could finally have a moment to himself inside his personal fortress of solitude. Daddy! Naruto's eyes snapped open as he was just about to succumb to Hypnos domain. Yes, princess? He asked, rubbing his eyes trying to stay awake. His silk pajamas felt amazingly warm against the crisp and soft sheets. Lacey opened his door and wasted no time before she jumped onto his bed. I'm scared, she muttered as she bit her lip, hugging her favorite teddy bear close. I can't sleep in my room, the shadow of the tree outside looks scary. Naruto gave a small chuckle. He knew the poltergeist was too frightening of a movie to watch. It's okay, sweetie, you can sleep here tonight. The girl smiled and quickly hugged her daddy. Thanks daddy, I love you. Love you too, sweetie, mumbled the father as he closed his eyes and fell back onto his pillow. Lacey snuggled up next to her daddy and rested her head on his shoulder, her loose blonde hair slightly tickling his face, making him adjust her position. He opened his arms and pulled his baby girl close, holding her protectively in his arms. The blanket fell warmly on the father and daughter. Naruto kissed the top of Lacey's head with his eyes closed, making sure to make his baby girl feel as safe and secure as possible, a task he had never failed to do ever since his daughters had been born. After all, making the children feel safe was the sole most important responsibility of any parent. Lacey smiled and rubbed her face against her daddy's arm. Good night, daddy. Good night, my little prindash. Dad, came the small voice of Annabeth. Naruto smiled and looked up to see his eldest peeking through the door, the light of the hallway seeping inside the room, enough for him to see Annabeth biting her lips. The one thing that his eldest was different from his youngest, Annabeth was prideful, even to her father, a trait of her that Naruto had grown used to. But he would never fail making sure that Annabeth knew that she would never have to be prideful to him and that he would always see her as the perfect daughter. He sat up a little with a smile. What is it, princess? I found a spider in my room. She sounded shaky, and Naruto sat up fully to look at her. It was crawling on my bed and almost touched my arm. Come here, Annie. He opened his arms and Annabeth wasted no time to jump onto the bed, finding comfort in her parents' embrace. Naruto hugged his daughter closer and kissed the top of her head, rubbing her back to soothe her fears as much as possible. You can sleep here tonight too, no spiders will come in here. He smiled and ruffled her princess curls. I will squash every single one of them before they can scare my little princess. Lacey smiled and hugged her sister's arm. I will help daddy squash those things. Thanks, Lace, said Annabeth with a smile to her baby sister. Here, Lucky will help you sleep, said the youngest Namikaze as she handed her sister the teddy bear in her arms. I'm not scared anymore, you can use Lucky now. Annabeth hugged Lacey and kissed her cheek. Okay, I'll use Lucky. Naruto smiled at his two little babies and patted both their heads. Okay, it's late and we have a fun day ahead of us tomorrow, so let's get some sleep. He lifted Lacey and placed her on the left side of the bed. Annabeth remained on the right side. He patted down his spare pillows for them and rested down himself, allowing his daughters to snuggle up to his sides. He held both of them with his arms and pulled them close, relieved to know that he could still keep them safe and secure. That was his job as their father, to keep them feeling safe and happy. Good night, girls, he whispered as he closed his eyes. I love you. Love you too, Daddy. Love you, Dad. Rhea smiled beautifully at the end of her dinner table as she watched her family enjoy dinner together. Artemis was the most adorable. The huntress had a perpetual smile on her face as she continued to refill her plate with Hestia's shepherd's pie and Rhea's calamari. It was endearing for Rhea to see her little granddaughter enjoy her food so much. Artemis may act very mature and serious at most times, but she was still a little goddess at heart. Rhea loved Artemis even more for it. Hestia sipped on her glass of nectar as she smiled at her little niece. Good thing I made several more portions tonight. Artemis blushed a little, but smiled at her aunt. It's really good, Aunt Hestia. Rhea smiled again at her daughter and granddaughter.
but then turned her attention to the other two goddesses at the table. The mother of the gods couldn't help but sigh at the sight of Athena and Aphrodite, both silent and in a daze. Ever since morning, love and war had been going for each other's throats, and it only made sense that they were finally tired.
Athena, are you sure you don't want seconds? Asked Hestia with a loving smile. Artemis is going to finish everything soon.
Artemis huffed as Athena shook her head. I'm fine, thank you, Aunt Hestia.
Rhea pursed her lips. Are you feeling okay, Athena?
Yes, I'm just a little tired. The goddess of wisdom rested back fully on her chair and crossed her arms, her gray eyes as bright and intimidating as ever. Her grandmother's and aunt's delicious food aside, she had more important issues to think about. Based on the past 12 hours she had spent with Naruto and Annabeth, she had deduced that Aphrodite was clearly ahead in their competition for Naruto's affection. From when they were cooking, to carving pumpkins, to the costume shopping, and during the movie, Naruto would always pay much more attention to Aphrodite. Whether it be a simple smile or a gently touch to their arm, Naruto would always be focused on the love goddess, and Athena was getting seriously angry.
Is she winning purely because she is sleeping with him, or is there some other reason?
Aphrodite, on the other hand, was also having similar thoughts. So far so good. Naruto is still much more affectionate with me even when Athena is around. Aphrodite closed her eyes and bit the inside of her cheek, but I still have to be careful. I can clearly tell that Naruto is attracted to Athena and she was still the one who met and fell in love with him first.
They both bonded before I even met Naruto. No matter what, Athena will be my most serious competition.
The love goddess almost scoffed at the thought. Who would have thought that the owl virgin would be my biggest competition?
Aphrodite?
Huh? Asked the love goddess as she was broken out of her stupor.
Sorry, what was that, Hestia? The goddess of the hearth smiled. I asked if you wanted more nectar.
No, thanks, replied Aphrodite, standing from her seat.
I'm going to put away my things before turning in for the night.
She smiled at Rhea and Hestia as she walked away. Thanks for the awesome dinner, Hestia, Mother Rhea.
You're very welcome, sweetie.
Rhea smiled knowingly as the goddess walked away, wondering if Athena would catch on soon. I must turn in as well. Have a good night, everyone, said Athena as she too walked away. She's more attentive than I thought, inwardly mused Rhea. Rhea's new home was built almost exactly like Naruto's home next door, but was a little bigger. It had one master bedroom and 3 secondary bedrooms. Aphrodite and Athena had both called dibs on 2 of them for themselves. They needed a base of operations for their plans. Athena may be the goddess of wisdom and battle strategy, but Aphrodite, with eons of experience in love, wasn't exactly less competent when creating plans to steal Naruto's heart. The game was on and war and love were clashing head-on. Slamming the door to her room, Aphrodite grinned as she snapped her fingers. A skimpy Jessica the Rabbit costume appeared in her hands. She softly laughed as she imagined the look on Naruto's face when she would teleport into their bedroom wearing it. With another snap of her fingers, the costume enveloped her perfect curves and she grinned at the result.
Perfect. What are you doing?
Aphrodite glared over at her door, where Athena stood with her arms crossed. The wisdom goddess had a stern expression on her face as she glared at her rival, silently threatening her with pain. Athena knew Aphrodite was up to something when she noticed that the pile of foam was the last to leave the store. She'd thought the love goddess had bought something in secret, and she found the proof now.
You can knock, you know?
Athena scoffed. Just answer the question. Aphrodite merely smiled and winked at her rival. I'm merely keeping my promise.
And what promise is that? Asked Athena with an edge in her voice, wondering if the slutty costume was of Naruto's request. I promised Naruto I'd seduce him every night.
Aphrodite smirked and crossed her arms under her impressive breasts, smiling wider as she enjoyed the angered look on Athena's face. We had an amazing night of passion yesterday, and I can't wait to get into his pants again.
Shut up! Cried Athena, don't talk about him like he's some boy toy. Husband, the love of my life, and boy toy are not necessarily mutually exclusive, Athena.
Aphrodite smacked her lips together and fixed some of her makeup as she spoke. I love Naruto more than anything, and it is precisely why the sex is so amazing. She smiled at the slightly flushed Athena. Believe me when I say this, sex is infinitely better when your partner is someone you truly love. Images of Naruto making passionate love to her filled Athena's mind, her brilliant and incredibly descriptive mind, and she couldn't help but blush.
Not that you would ever know.
Feeling particularly competitive, Athena spoke up. I'll have you know that I am still the woman Naruto fell in love with first. I was the one who gave him his first child. Aphrodite scoffed, but couldn't help but sound a little jealous. Don't assume that just because of your domain and experience your love for Naruto outclasses mine. I know that I've never fell in love like this before, but it doesn't make it any less powerful. Interesting, muttered Aphrodite as she stepped closer to Athena. I've never seen you like this before. What happened between you and Naruto? Athena stepped back as the love goddess narrowed her eyes at her, as if she was peering into her mind. Simple bonding of the mind doesn't give such powerful emotions, so you must have done something physical together. Athena was backed against the wall and Aphrodite stepped right up to her face, leaving a mere inch between their faces.
What did you do?
Athena refused to be defeated and steeled her gaze. I gave Naruto my first kiss.
That's cute, whispered Aphrodite, her hypnotizing powers on full blast as she stared into Athena's eyes. But unless you give him your virginity, you will never defeat me.
I have absolute control over love and lust, and while as a fellow goddess, it is much harder for me to affect you. Nothing is stopping me from affecting Naruto.
Athena glared at her harshly. How dare you mess with his mind?
Oh, I didn't mess with his mind at all. I will never betray the trust he has for me by conjuring fake feelings. Aphrodite leaned closer to Athena, making her incredibly uncomfortable, but I will use my powers to connect our feelings together. Our mutual love will resonate and amplify infinitely, and with my control over lust and how I am his perfect beauty personified, I will always be his number one. No matter what you say, I know for a fact that Naruto loves me.
Athena smirked, and you know that too, don't you?
The wisdom goddess stood tall and her gray eyes glowed with incredible power as she glared at her rival. No matter how hard you try or how much power you use, you will never rid his feelings for me from his heart.
Aphrodite glared back as Athena's smirk grew. With eons of experience with war, I know better than anyone that even with slim chances, victory is possible, and I will not lose to you.
Aphrodite smiled. We'll see about that.
You will see, I promise you, Aphrodite.
Okay, well, you have a good night. I'm going to Naruto's and my bedroom and I'm going to bang his brains out. She winked at Athena and snapped her fingers. See ya. The love goddess vanished in a puff of pink smoke and left behind a trailing scent of perfume.
Athena gritted her teeth and stomped the ground. Oh, no you don't.
The wisdom goddess wasted no time teleporting herself to the home next door. She couldn't sense Aphrodite's presence, which only meant that the Lady of Doves had masked her power and aura, but it didn't take a genius to figure out where she was. Quickly appearing in the hallway outside of the master bedroom, Athena almost tore the door apart as she stormed into the room, determined to not let Aphrodite take advantage of her future husband.
Aphrodite Shush.
Athena was immediately greeted with the sight of Aphrodite glaring at her with a finger on her lips, but then she saw the scene before her, and she couldn't help but soften greatly at the sight.
They're sleeping.
Annabeth and Lacey were snuggled up to their father's side and were peacefully sleeping the night away. Athena couldn't help but smile at how at peace and calm Annabeth looked with her dad's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Even little Lacey made Athena's heart flutter. The little girl rested on her side and had her legs perched on Naruto's chest, almost sleeping horizontal on the bed, though her head was still resting on Naruto's arm. They looked far too peaceful and Athena didn't have the heart to disturb them.
But Aphrodite didn't mind. What in Hades' name are you doing?
Aphrodite ignored her rival and continued to lift up the blanket on the left side of the bed before climbing in. She had changed back onto a simple silk nightie and she happily rested her head on Naruto's extended left arm as she hugged Lacey to her chest. It felt amazingly cozy and peaceful. Never had she thought about cuddling with her baby daughter and her husband like a real family. It felt incredible.
Good night, Athena.
Athena almost growled at the taunt, but she decided to take the challenge. She snapped her fingers and changed into her usual nightgown, she lifted the blankets on the right side of the bed and climbed in, ignoring the glare Aphrodite was giving her. But her competitiveness was quickly overwhelmed by nervousness. Her head was resting on Naruto's arm, she had never been so close and intimate with him before, and her heart was racing. The blush on growing uncontrollably on her face, but she did notice how great it felt. Even though the bed was far too small for 5 people, having her little daughter so close felt nice. For the first time in her immortal life, Athena held one of her children close like a real mother, and rested against her love like a real wife. It felt really good.
Good night, Aphrodite.
Athena gently wrapped her arms around Annabeth and kissed the top of her head, feeling more motherly than she had ever before. Annabeth was so much like her, it made Athena really proud, and the subtle hint of Naruto's quirks in her daughter made it all the better. The love of family was truly amazing. Now Athena could understand why Hera would desire it so much.
Good night, my little Annabeth. Good night, my love.
As Athena closed her eyes, thinking that she had proven equal to her rival's challenge, Aphrodite smirked victoriously. Over the years, she had really learnt how to squeeze time in between lovers, and even though those days were behind her, the tricks she had gathered could still be very useful. With one swift tap on Naruto's forehead, Aphrodite closed her eyes, allowing herself to dwell into Hypnos domain.
I was going to save this for the honeymoon, but desperate times call for desperate measures.
The goddess smiled as she embraced her baby daughter, wondering what her lover was dreaming about, hoping that it was her.
Let's find out. Whoa, what is this?
Instead of a sexy hotel suite or fancy restaurant, Aphrodite found herself on the roof of some sort of round building.
It was tall, she could tell from the high wind blowing through her hair, and it was overlooking some sort of village.
The air was clean and clear, no pollution whatsoever, and there was a sort of energy around the whole place that felt familiar, a sensation that she had felt many thousands of years ago. Then she noticed one man standing at the edge of the building. He was wearing some sort of combat vest under a long white jacket with red flames licking the bottom of it. It looked good on the man. Then she finally realized that the man was Naruto, her lover.
Naruto? She asked out loud. Naruto turned around and Aphrodite was taken aback.
Instead of her lover's usual innocent and loving gaze, she was met with the cold and calculated gaze of a seasoned warrior, one that reminded her of Zeus or Poseidon.
Who are you?
He asked, his voice nothing like the one she was used to.
It's me, Aphrodite.
The goddess stepped closer to Naruto and he kept a curious gaze on her, but slightly flinched when she touched his face.
Don't you recognize me, Naruto?
She bit her lip and looked into his oddly intimidating eyes. You are Naruto, right?
The man nodded. Yes, my name is Uzumaki Naruto, the Nanadame Hokage.
That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction.
Looking forward to having you on board again.